Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, Parallel Deku, back with another fanfiction. This is the 5th part of What If Deku and Others React to For Want of a Nail. Now before starting, please give this video a like. And subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Now playing Shadows, the horror movie heroes information. Hitoshi crossed yet another company off their list as Izuku dialed the net number. I think it's time we start looking into some plan BS. Izuku sighed as the phone rang on speaker. I was hoping this would work out, but it's looking like it's not going to. The phone stopped ringing and Izuku scrambled as a voice answered on the other end. Hello, you've reached the Help Us company, HUC for short. How can I help you today? Not a bad idea. Midnight says, slightly impressed. I think they have age requirements though. Mike considers. Aizawa shrugs. Maybe they don't or are different in that world. Yes, hello. Izuku said brightly. Your company provides civilians for hero training exercises, right? Yes, that would be correct. The receptionist replied. That's actually the entire point of our company. And do you ever provide other services? Shinso asked. Like villains for things like that? Not normally. The receptionist hummed. The Hero Commission normally prefers to have heroes fill those roles when possible. May I know why you're asking? You seem a little young to be hiring our services. Not hiring. Shinso sighs. Hoping to get hired. Izuku corrects. Yeah, a little. Izuku grimace. We're looking more along the lines of employment opportunities? We're going to be trying for hero schools this next year. Shinso clarified. So we were hoping to volunteer as villains and get some actual combat experience. That would give you an edge. The receptionist said. But unfortunately, as I said, we don't really provide that service. And even if we did, we have an age limit of at least 16 for our employees. Actually, there's a possibility. Is it alright if I put you on hold real quick? They have an idea. Hagakure bounces in her seat. Yeah, sure? Izuku frowned and turned to Shinso as jazzy hold music filled the room. Well, that's promising? Shinso shrugged, more than the other places that just politely laughed in our faces. Jiro mumbles. What was that? Mineta chimed in. Nothing, perv. Jiro scowled. Izuku nodded in agreement and was about to say something else when the hold music suddenly cut out. Alright, are you still there? Yeah. We are, Shinso said. What do you have for us? Well, it's not a guarantee, but our company has been contracted to be the civilians for an upcoming training exercise and I believe they are looking for villains as well. The receptionist said. However, they might also have an age requirement just like we do. They'll take what they can get. Ajuru sighs. Izuku hurried and reached for the notebook that Shinso was practically shoving into his hands. That's better than nothing. Do you know where we can find out more? I can give you a link. The receptionist giggled. I'm glad to see you two are taking the initiative. That will be really helpful when you're heroes. Izuku's jaw dropped and he looked at Shinso, who he could tell was having the exact same thought process. When they were heroes. Not if. They were going to be heroes. After a moment too long, he shook his head. Yes. Yes, please. Thank you so much. It takes so little support to surprise them. Joke whines. Their brains will break when they make it. Brave chuckles, setting Joke back to her laughter. This is your own demon fault, All Might. Recovery Girl complained. Seriously, what were you thinking? Cornering a young lady like that? Honestly, I almost wish she'd done more than just blind you, because maybe then you would actually learn your lesson. Preach. Tell him. Sing it. Kyoka sat awkwardly on the examination bed in the UA nurse's office, twisting her earphones between her fingers as Yagi, no, All Might, stood at the eye wash station getting chewed out by the oldest hero Kyoka had ever seen. This was an adventure, for it. I still feel bad. Kyoka fretted. I shouldn't have. Oh no, dearie, it isn't your fault that Yagi killed all his brain cells years ago. Recovery Girl assured her. You have absolutely nothing to be sorry for. All Might here was acting like a creep, and you responded accordingly. As far as I'm concerned, you were more of a hero in this situation than he was. Do I make myself clear? Yes, ma'am. Kyoka blinked in shock for a moment, then found herself smiling. Yes, ma'am. It's not my fault that All Might is an idiot. All Might sputtered as Recovery Girl laughed proudly. Oh, I like this one. You chose yourself a good successor, All Might. I'm almost tempted to say you might actually have some sense. Izuku pouts. Kyoka frowned. What did she mean by successor? And earlier, right after she'd sprayed him, All Might had said she was strong enough for his quirk, whatever that meant. At the time, Kyoka had been a little too preoccupied with not accidentally killing the number one hero to worry too much about it, but even after things had calmed down a little bit, Kyoka was used to overhearing things that she wasn't supposed to. Overhearing people's secrets was the worst part of having a hearing quirk, but it was something she'd had to get used to, so Jiro had just filed All Might's weird comment away as one of those mysteries she would never have an answer to. That reminds me, nice keeping one for all from me, Midoriya. Jiro smiles at him. It wasn't easy. Izuku chuckles. I couldn't really test your range without drawing suspicion. I bet. She snickered. Usually, however, those mysteries had nothing to do with her, and keeping a secret about her from her was decidedly less okay. What are you talking about? I'm not All Might's successor. He just offered some training sessions to help me get ahead before UA. Or at least that's all he told me. Recovery Girl shook her head and hit All Might's knees with her cane. You didn't tell her? Of all the harebrained, idiotic. He was interrupted by his own idiocy. Shigaraki chuckles. I was getting around to it. All Might insisted. If you hadn't noticed, our original meeting was interrupted. Jiro put her foot down. What are you two talking about? If you're just going to argue and not actually tell me, then I'm leaving. I'm not going to waste my time sticking around with people who aren't even willing to be honest with me. Recovery Girl glared at All Might, who looked as contrite as he could with his eyes still somewhat swollen from the pepper spray. We are referring to my quirk, young Jiro. It is called One for All and I would like you to inherit it. Well, that was blunt. Can you blame him? Shinso snarks. He made it this grand thing when he offered it to you, didn't he? It's All Might. I'm sure it was dramatic. Karotsu agrees. At Izuku's nod they smile at him. Hitoshi stared at the screen, his jaw on the floor as he recognized the logo. I think the HUC receptionist forgot to mention that this was an exercise for UA. Oh my, Netza begins. Depending on how this exercise is executed, I may have to add it to our own school. No, this is even better. Midoriya nodded like he was trying to reassure himself. This way, we can show our skills and abilities even before the entrance exam and make a more memorable first impression. We just need to be such good villains that they realize they need us on their side. This'll work. This'll work. Hitoshi raised one eyebrow skeptically. You're basically planning on scaring UA into thinking we'll become villains if we don't become heroes? Well. Midoriya smiled sheepishly. We are trying to incite fear. They are menaces in the making and I am living for it. Dobby laughs. There an age limit? Hitoshi leaned over to read some of the text. There's no point in getting our hopes up and planning on this thing if they won't even let us participate. Midoriya quickly scrolled through the page, muttering unintelligibly to himself for a minute as he read the rules. No. Actually, there's a section for minors. We'll need to have our parents sign a waiver just in case we get injured or something, so that'll be a challenge, but it's reasonable and they just say minor, not a specific age, so we can definitely apply. So, Shinso begins other Mii's quirkist fosters and your helicopter mom. He glanced at Izuku to see a look of stress on his face. Fun. Hitoshi smiled. Okay, that sounds good. What do we need to do to apply? We need to send in basically a fake police file, Midoriya said. All the information the police would have on us if we were real villains. Hitoshi's face fell, like our quirks. Izuku grins. Not necessarily. Causing his friends to ask after his theories, to which he replied no spoilers. Midoriya got a calculating look on his face. Not necessarily. Say we train enough that I can hack into the cameras and erase footage of us, and you can make people forget you ever brainwashed them, then we can argue that the police would reasonably remain ignorant of our quirks and, well, and even our faces and identities, if we're careful enough. We can give them just enough information to give us the advantage, all while studying the sports festival to make sure we know what quirks and personalities we're up against. How curious. Netsu smiles in approval. Do you really think they'll allow that? Hitoshi asked skeptically. Midoriya shrugged. No, but I'm not sure they'll allow us to be heroes either, and we're doing it anyway. Touché. Hitoshi rolled his eyes. We're gonna be heroes. Midoriya nodded, villains first, but yeah, we're gonna be heroes. I can't wait. This'll be fun. I hope it works. Headcase smiles at the excited children as they cheer and bicker. She calls the room to order as the next chapter begins. Now playing Deku? I think he's some pro. Strategy. The students looked up at the list Aizawa had projected with the students' names, ranks, and scores in shock. Izuku had narrowly beaten Mineta, even though he'd been able to use his quirk in at least the repeated sidestep. Mineta burst into tears, only stopping when Ajra hit him over the head with his tail and reminded him about the strategy exercise. Darn, it'd be nice to get rid of the G. Uraraka gripes. I take it the rumors are true then? Shinso asks. Mei growls. Alright Deku, do you have a good understanding of your classmates' quirks? Aizawa asked. When Izuku nodded, he turned to the rest of the class. I will go inside for 5 minutes, and when I return, you will try to take me down. He turned and walked away. Good luck. All eyes turned to look at Izuku, who smiled. So here's what I have in mind. Why should we listen to you, Deku? Bakugo stepped forward, explosions popping from his hands. You're just some quirkless nobody. Izuku took a deep breath. I may not have an awesome quirk like you do, Kaken, but he screwed his eyes shut. That doesn't mean I'm useless. The groups cheer for the boy standing his ground. There was a long moment of silence before Bakugo huffed, whatever nerd. He turned away from the group. There's no way I'm taking orders from you. If any of you other extras know what's up, you'll refuse to follow this useless freak, but whatever. I'm out of here. Kaken went over and sat underneath one of the trees at the far end of the yard. Izuku's eyes lit up. Sitting where he was, Kaken would be the first thing Aizawa would see when he came out, which meant that he, whether he knew it or not, could serve as a distraction to make the rest of the plan work. Dobby grins, yeah, used the stubborn FCK. Ida tossed a flare toward where Kachen was sitting, then turned to the rest of the group. That was uncalled for. Deku has quite the professional reputation and he is far from useless. Although, he turned to Izuku, the fact that you are quirkless puts your performance during the entrance exam into an entirely different light. I must apologize again for my rudeness that day. I couldn't really say before, but you are the first person since I was diagnosed quirkless to apologize to me for, well, anything really. Izuku tells Ida, smile softening, thank you for that. Ida doesn't know how to respond, so he settles for of course. It's not a big deal. Izuku waved his hands placatingly, then rubbed the back of his neck. You didn't know I was quirkless, and I try not to tell people if I can help it. With good reason. Jiro growls. Still, Ida pushed his glasses up his nose. It was very impressive. Dude, Kaminari interrupted, are you really a recommendation student, even though you're quirkless? Dude. Kaminari deadpants toward his other self. Izuku nodded. I had the good luck to get to know a few pro heroes in the last year. They recommended me because of my skills in analysis and strategy. Do you know why there are 3 of us in this class? Todoroki's expression was strong to read, but Izuku figured he was confused since his position as a recommendation student wasn't exactly normal. Politics, he gave a small, nervous smile. Nedzu figured there'd be a mutiny among the parents if a quirkless kid took one of the 4 normal recommendation spots, so he petitioned the school board to add an extra one this year. They officially approved it after seeing my performance in the exam. Can I just say, FCK Society, and be done with it? Shinso snarks. Not that this isn't interesting, Jiro said brusquely, but Aizawa-sensei is going to be coming back any minute. Alright. Izuku said, Jiro, you can hear really well, right? She nodded. Okay, go near the door and listen. Warn us when he's coming back. Jiro nodded and headed off. Koda, you communicate with animals, correct? Koda nodded nervously. Okay, could you get some birds to see where Aizawa-sensei is now? Go stand on the other side of the door as Jiro so that Aizawa can't see you both at the same time. That way, even if he cancels one of your quirks, the other will still have theirs and will be able to warn us when he comes. Starting off strong. Aizawa comments. What about the rest of us, dude? Kirishima asked, and a few people took an involuntary step back at the wide grin that spread across Izuku's face. Here's the plan. This is gonna be good. Kaminari says, rubbing his hands together in excitement. As soon as the 5 minutes were up, Shoyuta headed back outside. It would be interesting to see what the problem child would come up with, and would be even more interesting to see if his other students were willing to put aside their biases and listen to him. This was as much a test of his other students to see if they could cooperate as it was a chance for Deku to prove himself. Not that Shoyuta would ever tell them that. A discrimination test? Sounds like you. Mike remarks. He walked out the doors with his quirk already activated, just in case they were planning a blitz attack, but there was no one there, just Bakugo sitting moodily under a tree. Shoyuta narrowed his eyes. Where were they? All of a sudden a few objects were thrown at his face from the tree line and exploded when they were just a foot from his face. Flash grenades. Yaoyorozu must have made them. He closed his eyes as soon as he saw the light, then opened them as soon as he thought it was safe, only for them to start watering tearfully. The problem child seriously just used tear gas on him? Brutal. Oh, that looks like it hurts. As Shoyuta squinted around, he could slightly see Tokoyami's dark shadow spread out by the main building and could tell he was hiding other students, but couldn't tell who. All of a sudden, a patch of thin air pushed him over. Nice try, Hagakure, but he's a trained pro-hero. It's going to take a lot more than that to take him down. He tried to regain his footing like he always did when someone tried to throw him off balance, only to find the ground beneath his feet SLCK with acid. He sighed in inconvenience, but not something he'd never faced. Fall. All of a sudden, his muscles tensed as an electric shock coursed through him. The acid was conductive. Where was Kaminari hiding? This would be so much easier if he just knew where to look to cancel out their quirks, but the students were all being careful to hide from him. Go, Kaminari! A shower of small pebbles started pelting him from the tree line. He looked over in that direction, and some of the pebbles slowed down and dropped to the ground as their gravity returned. As if that was a cue, Ajuru, Kirishima, Sato, and Shoji all rushed out from behind trees, equipped with sunglasses and gas masks, and started attacking him, trying to surround him so that he couldn't cancel all their quirks at once. Their timing needs work, but this attack is well executed. Netsu comments. Shoyuta smiled and readied his capture weapon to take them down, only to find it wouldn't move like it was supposed to. He looked down at it to find that Mineta had thrown his sticky S all over it while Shoyuta was distracted by Uraraka's pebbles. He activated his quirk, which was getting painful since the tear gas hadn't dissipated yet, and the S fell off. He turned back toward the close combat team as they reached him, only to be blinded again by Aoyama's naval laser. Fine, even if he couldn't effectively use his quirk, he still had enough battle experience to combat his students based on their movements alone. Sensei really said, "Seek it, I'll fight blind." Shinso chuckles. We haven't given him much of a choice. Todoroki mentions. The close combat team kept up a steady stream of attacks which combined with the laser and tear gas to disorient Shoyuta just enough that he didn't realize Sero's tape was reaching out toward his ankles until it was already wrapped around him. He was yanked off his feet and he saw Ida running with the other end of the tape as he slid down an ice path, apparently made so that he wouldn't get hurt by being dragged at super speeds across the rough grounds. At least you won't get road rash. Midnight teases. He still got tear gassed. All Might reminds. It's cute that you seem to think this is a first for him. She chuckles. Shoyuta slid to a stop at Deku's feet, who smiled down at him proudly as he stuck a foot on his chest. Hey there, Eraser. Give up? He sighed heavily and nodded, his body going limp in surrender. Good work, problem child, very impressive. He glared at Deku, but did you have to use tear gas? Deku rubbed the back of his neck nervously. You're always saying to not be afraid to exploit any weakness in an opponent. He did this to himself really. Dobby chuckles. His other students were all yelling and high-fiving each other as they gathered around their downed teacher. That was awesome. Ashido yelled. Yeah, super manly. Shoyuta extricated himself from the tape and stood, putting eye drops in. Yeah. Good work, Brits. Don't let this go to your head though. You'll never have a 20-known fight in your hero careers. He stood up straighter, and now for the expulsions. The group went silent, with the exception of Mineta who started crying again as he stared up at Shoyuta with fear. Way to kill a mood eraser. Joke whined. I try. Aizawa deadpants, completely serious. Shoyuta gave a deranged smile. It was a logical ruse. Several students started crying along with Mineta, who had switched to tears of relief as Deku practically fell over from laughter. You're secretly a little Sid, aren't you? Shinso asks Izuku. Izuku, with the most innocent look on his face, responds secretly? Yaoyorozu shrugged. I thought that was obvious from the beginning. A bell rang in the school, signaling lunchtime, and his students practically ran toward the building. The Shoyuta called out. Deku paused and looked up at him with wide, worried eyes, but Shoyuta just smiled softly. You did good, problem child. Deku gave a smile so bright that it should be illegal. Thanks, Eraser. Where did you get sunglasses? Izuku stares at Shinso, who just smirks and ignores him. Whatever, he raised one eyebrow. You'd better get going unless you want to miss lunch. Alright. Izuku started to run to catch up with his classmates and waved over his shoulder. See you later, Eraser. Shoyuta chuckled and shook his head, heading toward his office to get his super extra strength eye drops and rest his eyes for the next lesson. You know, that's fair. Sensei deserves a nap after that. Sato claims. D'accord. Aoyama comments. Izuku walked through the too-full cafeteria, balancing his tray and trying to find an empty table, as had been his habit since he'd been diagnosed quirkless. Trying to sit with other people was just asking for trouble. This puts certain things in perspective. Uraraka comments. Which was part of the reason he was so confused when Uraraka enthusiastically waved at him and motioned for him to come to sit by her and Ida. He looked behind him, expecting to see Ishido or maybe Jiro behind him, but the only other person she could have been waving at was some kid with purple hair that Izuku didn't know. Judging by the slightly raised eyebrow the purple-haired kid was giving him, he didn't know Uraraka either. Which meant she was waving at Izuku. Oh no. Cameo. May cheers. Izuku slowly went to go sit next to her, wondering if this was some kind of trick. It had to be, right? He was quirkless and Kaken had made sure everyone knew it, so why would anyone be nice to him? Izuku found himself in a crushing hug courtesy of one gravity-defying friend. That, Uraraka said cheerfully. That was super cool how you came up with a plan to beat Aizawa-sensei. You're super smart. Izuku chuckled nervously, waiting for her to mock him, but she never did. Instead, she turned to her food as if nothing else needed to be said. Izuku just looked at her in shock. What was happening? A healthy friendship buddy. Shiro comforts. It was very impressive, although we did have to use some underhanded tricks to win. Ida frowned. However, it does appear that was the only way to win. Izuku nodded. Yeah, Eraser's strong to counter because he can cancel your quirks, so you kinda have to be willing to fight dirty if you're going to beat him. It's the same with some villains. He shrugged. I'm planning on being an underground hero, so fighting dirty is just kinda part of the package. It sounds so simple but doesn't feel right. Ida remarks. Still, Ida said, I wish we didn't have to resort to such tricks. Oh, lighten up, Ida. We won, didn't we? And no one got expelled. Uraraka hit him softly on the shoulder and Ida looked like he didn't know whether this was normal or if he was supposed to scold her for it. Uraraka giggled. Do you know now? Yes, I believe I do. Ida huffs a laugh. Yo. That. Kirishima clapped him on the back as he, Ishido, Shiro, and Kaminari passed by on their way to another table. That was super manly how you beat Aizawa-sensei. We're looking forward to getting to know you better this year. Izuku blushed and looked at him with wide eyes. Okay? I really didn't do much. I mean, I left most of the fighting to you guys. Don't be so modest, dude. Kaminari laughed. Compared to a bunch of hopeless idiots like us, you're a regular genius. He shouldn't talk like that. Izuku murmurs. You're not. Shiro cut Izuku off by laying a hand on his shoulder. It's okay. We have other strengths, but intelligence just isn't one of them and there's no use in denying that. Ishido smiled. Let's go sit next to Bakugo. He's trying to be all surly over by himself. Izuku genuinely hoped Kaken didn't explode them immediately. They were too nice to die young. Holy shit. Kaminari laughed. He really thought that, didn't he? Ishido asks. By the fact that he's blushing, I'd say yes. Shiro points out. Dude. Kirishima chuckles. Bakugo just sulks. Shortly after their group left, Yaoyorozu caught Izuku's eye from across the cafeteria and headed over with her tray, dragging a blank-faced Todoroki behind her. Hey, Midoriya, she said as they sat down. Or do you prefer to be called Deku? It seems to be what Aizawa-sensei and Bakugo both call you, and they seem to have known you the longest. Izuku shrugged, I don't really care at this point. Deku is the name I use for the analysis work I do for underground heroes, and it's going to be my hero name, so that's why Eraser calls me that. You can just call me whatever you want, I guess. Izuku shrugs as well. Uraraka said. It has a you can do it vibe to it. Izuku laughed. You know, you're not the first person to tell me that. To me you are. Izuku elbows her lightly. She smiles back at him. You already know your hero name? Ida said in surprise. Izuku nodded. As weird as it is to already have one, I already have a reputation, so it wouldn't make any sense to change it. I've even already been asked to give an autograph or two. He immediately slapped his hands over his mouth. Oh no, why did he say that? They were going to think he was bragging and then they'd hate him and… The others were staring at him wide-eyed and then Uraraka started laughing. You're gonna go underground and you're already famous? Sign me up. The others, with the exception of Todoroki, joined in on the laughter. Izuku turned bright red and tried to splutter out some sort of excuse, but the others just ignored him. The lunch hour continued like that with Izuku gradually getting more comfortable around these friends? Was that what they were? Izuku didn't know. It still felt like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. You'll have to work on that Dekuken. Toga giggles. They were going to walk together back to the classroom, but Izuku let the others go on ahead as he used the restroom. As he headed back, he spotted Aizawa off in a side hallway. Izuku was glad that Aizawa's eyes looked a little less red than they had. He still felt really bad for having Yaoyorozu make tear gas during the exercise. How was lunch? It was great. Izuku grinned. Everyone's really nice. It's so different from middle school. Aizawa scowled but let it slide, which Izuku was grateful for. Instead, Aizawa just frowned at Izuku's tie. Problem child, what did you even do to make a piece of fabric look like that? I don't have someone to teach me stuff like that. Izuku threw his hands up. Izuku smiled sheepishly. Well, my dad's not really around to teach me and mom never learned so. Let's just say that while you can learn anything on YouTube, some things are more difficult than others. Don't worry though, I'll get the hang of it. Ha ha ha. No you won't. You poor fool. Snort cough, I hate you all. Izuku deadpants, no one believes him. Aizawa just huffed and grabbed Izuku's tie, untying it and readying it much neater while Izuku looked at him in shock. Problem child. He shook his head as he tucked the end of the tie under Izuku's blazer and squeezed his shoulder. Get to class. You wouldn't want to be late for your first official heroics lesson. He's such a dad. Hagakure-ku's. Ajuru smiles softly. Sir. Izuku said and Aizawa tilted his head like he did when he was trying to hide a smile. Izuku slipped into the room and went to his seat, unfortunately right behind Kaken. He still wasn't quite sure how to feel about him. Kachen had been his first friend, but ever since he'd made other friends, it had kinda tossed his whole perspective of their relationship on its head, especially since Aizawa and the others insisted that no one who treated him like Kaken did could really be his friend. Kaken glared at him as he passed, letting off a few intimidating pops of his quirk before huffing and turning to face forward as the bell rang. DCK. Bakugo says evenly. Izuku wondered who their heroics teacher would be. Probably one of the more combat-oriented teachers like Snipe or Ectoplasm. Oh, this year was going to be great. A loud bang sounded and everyone flinched as the door was slammed open. Izuku's eyes widened at the sight of their new heroics teacher, who was grinning at the class in all his muscled glory. I'm here. Oh sit. Last time they spoke he crushed his dream. Oh look, the other shoe. Damn it, damn it, damn it. Alright brats, the sooner you quiet the sooner we get back here. Dobby shouts. You're certainly eager. Headcase comments. Mastermind is next, why wouldn't I be? He snarks back. Her smile widens, giving him a look of knowledge that sets him on edge. Her voice is overly sweet as she answers, you'll see. The sing-songy way she says it does nothing to comfort him. Now playing mastermind strategist for higher preparations, Shigaraki scowled as he looked at the new recruits. Yeah, Sensei said it was a good idea to use the hero killer's ideals to grow their numbers, but he just didn't see why. Maybe if Stain's ideals brought in more six-foodle behemoths like Muscular, sure. But a schoolgirl and an emo? This was the League of Villains, not the Disney Channel. So, Izuku whispers to himself. Go away, he glared at them from behind the hand on his face. I can already tell you're the kind of people I hate the most. Don't be hasty, Tamura Shigaraki, Kurojuri said. I'm sure these two will add greatly to our cause. Hi. I'm Himiko Toga. The schoolgirl said excitedly. I loved Mr. Staney. He looked so beat up when he died, it was so cute. She did a little dance in place, and you've worked with Mine-chan, right? He's cute too. I remember when he could barely hold a knife and asked me to teach him. It was adorable. You taught Mastermind to fight? The emo asked incredulously. Toga pouts. He has a point. Dobby teases. Jiren laughed. Yeah, I was surprised too, but this cute little lady is the main suspect in a string of exsanguination murders. Mastermind sure does have an eye for quality. Shigaraki glared at the emo. At least she has the manners to introduce herself. What about you? What's your name? The emo returned the glare. Right now, I'm going by Dobby. I can't believe that Beach got me all worried about my first appearance for no reason. Dobby griped. That's no good. I meant your real name. You'll know it when you need to know it. Dobby said coldly. In any case, my new purpose is to carry out the hero killer's will. That wasn't what I asked you, Patchwork. Shigaraki scratched his neck. Why is everyone so hung up on Stain, anyway? He's all I ever hear about. Every dim day. It's really pissing me off. And yet they'll still work together. Jiro rolls her eyes. He lunged toward the two, who made to fight back, but Kurojiri warped their hands so their attacks went nowhere. Calm yourself, Tamura Shigaraki. If you want to succeed, we must increase our numbers. Our chance is at hand. He leaned close. We must use the hero killer's ideology to further our own ends. Shigaraki stalked away. I'm leaving. He slammed the door behind him. Toga smiled. I really thought he was gonna kill us for a sec. I believe he knows what he has to do, Kurojiri said calmly. Shall we get back to you about recruitment at a later date? Well, that wasn't much different. Dobby huffs. Shudo stood awkwardly by the fountain in the mall courtyard. Yayarozu had invited him to go with the rest of the class, and he hadn't been able to think of a good excuse in time. The rest of the class had split off into groups of 2 and 3, leaving him alone. Yamamo had invited him to come with her and Jiro to look at swimsuits, but he already had one, so he opted to stay behind. Maybe if he left quickly, no one would question it? Visiting my mother was a much better plan. Todoroki confirms. Aren't you one of those students from UA? Hey look, Todoroki's getting my mall encounter. Shudo saw a teenager in a ratty black hoodie, but he couldn't see his face. You were the second-place winner at the sports festival, right? Shudo grimaced as the stranger put an arm around his shoulder. You're pretty powerful. Please get away from me. What can I say? I'm just a huge fan. The man didn't move his arm. I can't believe I'm running into you again. It makes me think it might not be a coincidence. Shudo's eyes widened slightly as the man put a hand around his throat, keeping his middle finger lifted. It feels like destiny, but I guess from your perspective, we haven't met since the attack on UA. Is this what you did to the green kid? Dobby asked. So funny. You're so cruel. The man smiled at him, allowing Shudo to see his face. Tamura Shigaraki, the head of the League of Villains with a 5-point disintegration quirk. Shudo swallowed, and suddenly the hand around his throat felt much more threatening. Izuku says with his voice pitched high. Why don't we sit down and chat for a while? Shudo Todoroki. Shigaraki led Shudo over to a nearby bench, and they sat down with Shigaraki's hands still at Shudo's throat. I could just freeze you right here, you know? Shudo said. Shigaraki laughed. If you tried, I'd just put my finger down and the first thing to go would be your throat. That is an unpleasant mental image. Ida remarks. Here with all these people? A hero would come to catch you. Shigaraki shrugged. Sure, but how many of these smiling sheep could I take out before that happened? I'm fast. I could probably take out 20, 30, maybe even more before a pro finally showed up. These idiots assume that everyone has the same morals, but any one of them could use their quirk and start a massacre right now. They think laws and rules will protect them. They're convinced nothing bad could ever happen to them. People should be able to live like that. All Might huffs. What's your point? Shigaraki shrugged. That's just it. I don't know. I hate pretty much everything, but right now the hero killer pisses me off the most. Have you ever hated something so much you just wanted to kill it? My father, I shouldn't be surprised. Endeavor size. Shudo thought, but bit his tongue before he could say that. Wasn't the hero killer one of your men? Not technically, Shigaraki replied, but that's what the media made it seem like. And now everyone's obsessed with him. Everything I've done, releasing Nomus on Hosa City, the attack on you, even killing All Might. It's all been overshadowed by that stupid hero killer and his stupid ideology. In the end, all he did was try to get rid of what he hated, same as me, so why is everyone so obsessed with him? He actually had a reason, as horrid as it was. Ida grumbles. Oh no. Shudo said slowly, maybe it's because he convinces everyone to hate what he does. His ideology makes sense, not all heroes deserve the title, and I think maybe everyone knows that deep down, they're just too afraid to say it. Or maybe they don't want to believe it. So they just let heroes keep taking power and abusing the system. Stain was a maniac, but he didn't destroy things just because it sounded fun. He was trying to make a change, show how corrupt the hero system really is. Shudo's voice had dropped to a whisper, that's why I agree with him. Shudo flinched at the admission his methods are too extreme. Shigaraki looked at him strangely, you have some strange opinions for a hero student. Shudo just stared at the ground helplessly. He hadn't really meant to say all that, but maybe it was because Shigaraki was already a villain that Shudo thought maybe the guy would understand. Shigaraki wouldn't judge him for hating heroes because he hated them too. Shudo wondered what had happened to make Shigaraki hate All Might so much. Could it have been something similar to why Shudo hated Endeavor? It's nothing like that. Shigaraki scowls. So you think people like the hero killer so much because he proved the corruption of hero society? Shudo nodded carefully and Shigaraki smiled. It all makes sense now. Why All Might pissed me off so much, why the hero killer made me so angry. It was right in front of me. All Might was the reason why these people smile and think they're safe because heroes will always protect them. They trust them when really heroes don't save everyone, and they don't deserve our trust. I'm sensing a theme. Jiro deadpants. Shigaraki released Shudo's throat and looked at him. I don't need to change my ways after all. I just need to prove how fragile society's sense of safety really is. Thank you, Todoroki, you've been a big help. He stood. Don't try to follow me, hero. If you try, I'll get angry. Shudo watched him leave until he disappeared into the crowd. I'm not a hero. He muttered. I have this sudden sense of foreboding. Shinso says tensely. Izuku agrees. Definitely. Uraraka shivers. Toga hugged Izuku the moment he walked into the bar and gave him an embrace on the cheek. Mainjin. How are you? It's been so long. Izuku laughed and pried her hands away. Himiko, you just saw me a few weeks ago. It feels like an eternity. She pouted. Bestie. Toga cheers. Welcome, Mastermind, Kurojairi said. Can I get you a drink? Sure, I'll take cranberry juice if you have any. Kurojairi nodded and a laugh came from the corner. You have no qualms about murdering heroes and yet you're worried about the legal drinking age? Dobby scoffed, some villain. Shigaraki scowls. Why would an intelligence build take on such a harsh debuff? Izuku raised an eyebrow. It's not so much that I'm concerned about the legal drinking age as it is that I make a living with my brain and I prefer not to have anything slowing it down. He turned back to the bar. You're Dobby, right? Cremation quirk? Yeah, Dobby said and took a seat next to Izuku at the bar. How'd you know? I make it my business to know everyone in the underground, especially if I'm going to be working with them. Izuku said simply, I've had my eye on you for a while now. That's mildly terrifying. Dobby deadpants. Dobby looked vaguely concerned, but it was strong to tell many facial expressions with his scars. Kurojairi set a glass of cranberry juice down on the bar and Izuku pulled down his mask, letting it pool around his neck. Whoa, Mastermind, Dobby said, aren't you concerned about people seeing your face? Izuku smiled, I'm concerned about heroes seeing my face. As odd as it sounds, my identity is not completely unknown in the underground. Jiren and Himiko know who I am, for example, and quite a few people have seen my face. And yet no one would dare talk to us. Tsukachi sighs. Dobby raised an eyebrow, and you're not concerned about anyone snitching to the cops? Izuku shook his head. I was at first, but normally by the time people know my face, they're already familiar with my reputation. He took a sip of his juice. I've got a bit of a temper. If anyone screws me over, I screw them over twice as strong. There was a gang a few months back, the Blue Dogs, have you heard of them? Dobby nodded. They're dead now, aren't they? Izuku nodded gleefully. They tried to threaten me into working with them rather than paying me. I gave them their plans, but then tracked down all the enemies the gang had and made sure they knew the weaknesses of every single member. They didn't last a week. Effroyable. Liam shivers. Dobby shivered. Remind me not to piss you off. Izuku smiled. If I have to remind you, it's already too late. I love this kid. Dobby grins. Shigaraki walked into the room. Thanks for coming, Mastermind. It's always more fun when you're my player too. Not a problem, Shigaraki. You pay well and your jobs are always interesting. So what do you have in mind? Shigaraki sat at the bar. We're going to show how fragile society really is by attacking a UA training camp, kidnapping one of the students, and turning them to villainy. This old song and dance. Bakugo groans. Izuku thought for a moment, that might be difficult. Do you have a plan in place? Shigaraki shook his head. We have a spy, but not one I'm willing to pull out yet. He'll be leaking the location to us as soon as they arrive. So there is a mole. Mike shouts. Not necessarily. Nezustatus. Correct. Headcase agrees depending on the world there might not be one, or there could be multiple, and who they are, or why they are doing it can change drastically. And Clouds doesn't like repetition. Izuku points out. Headcase smiles at him and Clouds doesn't like repetition. Izuku nodded. All right then, who do you have in mind? Shigaraki smiled and pulled a photo from his pocket. Katsuki Bakugo. Collective sigh. Izuku frowned and took the photo. It was of Katsuki chained up on the podium at the sports festival. He'd taken offense that Todoroki hadn't used his fire in their fight, so his win didn't mean anything. Izuku got where he was coming from, but at the same time, Todoroki didn't use his fire against anyone, so Katsuki really shouldn't have taken it personally. Yeah, no, that's a terrible idea. Dobby laughs shot down. Dobby laughed as Shigaraki stared at Izuku in shock, but he already acts villainous. I know. Izuku laughed. The problem is that he's too stubborn. You'll never be able to get Katsuki to be a villain because he doesn't see himself as one. He sees himself as a hero and no amount of threatening or bribery is going to convince him otherwise. He let the group digest that information before continuing. If you're really serious about recruiting a hero student, I'd suggest going after Shudo Todoroki instead. And there it is. Shinso sighs. I know we've said we'd follow you anywhere. Todoroki turns to Izuku, but this is not what we meant. I know. Izuku nods. Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku saw Dobby tense slightly and smiled. The Dobby in the crowd tensed as well. Oh no. The number one hero's son? Shigaraki said in confusion. What makes you think we'll be able to turn him? Take it from someone who used to want to be a hero. Izuku smiled as the group reacted to that. People don't turn to villainy without a reason, and Todoroki has one of the best reasons I've ever seen. He was abused by a hero for years and no one ever saved him. Who would ever believe the number one hero was guilty of child abuse? Izuku lifted his glass to take a drink. And besides, we have his brother to help us convince him. The theater falls into a shocked silence, staring at the screen completely frozen. Dobby glares at Headcase as she smiles with a challenge on her face. The others looked confused as Dobby stared at him in shock. How did you know? A strong fire quirk, bright teal eyes, a hatred of all heroes, but especially Endeavor? Izuku shrugged. It wasn't that strong to put together. I told you I'd had my eye on you for a while. He looked Dobby in the eyes. So what do you say to ya, Todoroki? Are you ready to see your brother? You're a King Beach. Dobby growls at Headcase. I know. So what now? You gonna drag me to the front so everyone can question me? No, I'm not. She responds calmly. Why not? Todoroki interrupts. He's standing there gritting his teeth and clenching his fists. Dobby won't look at him. Because Clouds doesn't shy away from heavy topics. She waits for the room to settle just a little bit more. I know it's harsh, but we must continue. The people reluctantly sit and turn back to the screen as the next chapter plays. Now playing Viridian the Green Guide New Beginnings. Izuku had spent the last week cramming nonstop for his entrance exam. He still wasn't entirely confident in his ability to pass, but he'd reached the point in his studying where he was starting to forget more than he learned. which probably meant that he should just take the exam even if he'd inevitably fail. At least then he'd be able to move on and put his eggs in other baskets. Oh joy watching a kid take a test. Dobby snark still miffed. Mom was at work and had left that morning after giving him an embrace on the cheek and wishing him luck on his test. She had promised him katsudon that evening as well, either as a congratulatory meal or as comfort food. It would depend on how Izuku thought he did. Izuku didn't really see the point of her going through all that trouble for him, but there was a selfish part of him that was just so happy that she cared. He wished that part didn't feel so good. It made the rest of him feel worse. Poor green bean. Midnight whines. Just before noon, Izuku finally put his books to the side and went to the school's website, clicking on the tab that would take him to the entrance exam. He spent about half an hour filling out his basic information, like his name, what other schools he'd gone to, his GPA for the last year, etc., cursing the fact that his cast made it so strong to type. He could still move his fingers, but his entire arm itched and started to ache if he used it too much, so at least for the next few days, he'd be stuck chicken pecking at the keyboard. It was annoying. Too true. Been there. Agreed. Finally, he reached the welcome screen and read through the instructions. The test itself was 200 questions, and he had 3 hours to complete it. Izuku glanced at the clock. It was 1200, which meant that he had until 300 to finish the exam. That would mean he had just under a minute to answer each question, but that didn't count the time that he'd have to use to check over his answers at the end. Izuku took one last shaky breath before clicking the button that said Start Exam. You got this. Ace that test. Do it, do it, do it. The questions were deceptively easy. Izuku had assumed that he'd have to rush to complete each question in under a minute, but he was able to answer most questions almost instantly, which gave him more time on the more difficult questions, like the ones in the math section. If Izuku wasn't freaking out about the fact that his entire future depended on him doing well on this test, he'd almost say it was fun. Was that weird? He could almost hear Kaken telling him that he was a DMN nerd. You are a nerd. Bakugo grumbles. And there's nothing wrong with that. Kirishima elbows him, earning himself a growl, which he ignores with a smile. Before he knew it, Izuku had answered every single question. He sighed in relief and looked at the clock. It was now 125, which meant he still had. Wait a minute. Izuku felt a cold wave of anxiety wash over him. How long did he have again? Izuku knew it had a 3 in it, but did that mean he had 3 hours? Or was it 1 hour and 30 minutes? How long was he supposed to spend? He couldn't have finished in under half the time, so it must have just been an hour and a half, which meant that he only had. Damn it. You have time. Izuku looked over at the clock again and started freaking out. It was 128. He only had 2 minutes. He didn't have any time to look over his answers. But if he didn't look over his answers, he wouldn't have a chance to change any of his answers, which meant he had no chance of passing. Unless he really did have a full 3 hours. But if he didn't have a full 3 hours and tried to go back and check his answers, then he'd miss the deadline and fail by default. But if he didn't check his answers, then he wouldn't pass. How long did he have? Was it 3 hours or an hour and a half? 3. You only used half the time. Come on, man. Izuku glanced at the clock one last time. 129. It was better safe than sorry, right? Wasn't it better to get half the questions wrong than turn it in late? Izuku flailed as he scrambled to press submit, then frantically froze as he realized what he'd just done. What had he just done? This was terrible. He hadn't even checked any of his answers. His eyes stung as he tried to hold back his tears. It looked like Mom's katsudon was going to be a comfort meal, after all. I'm sure he did great. Uraraka says firmly. I hope so. Izuku comments. Shoyuta curled up in the corner of the staff room at lunch and scrolled through the obituaries. He vaguely knew that he was just making things worse for himself, but he couldn't help checking every day, a sick sense of dread deep in his stomach as he desperately hoped that he wouldn't recognize any of the photos. Not that he'd ever seen Viridian without the mask, but he knew that the kid was young and had green hair. Plus, the fact that suicide would be listed as the cause of death would be a dead giveaway. Oh Sho, you can't do that to yourself. Mike squeezes the man's shoulder. You wouldn't do much better. Aizawa grumbles back. When the kid hadn't shown his face for a few days, Shoyuta had hoped that he'd finally taken some time off to heal from some of his injuries. He'd thought that maybe the kid had actually grown a small sense of self-preservation, but that only went so far, and it had now been over a week since Shoyuta had seen Viridian. He'd even checked with Amplifier and Rocklock, but neither of them had seen him, and Tsukachi said that no one matching Viridian's description had been found dead from a villain fight. Even some of the other nocturnal heroes were starting to ask about the missing problem child, and they didn't even run into Viridian that often in the first place. We all are worried for the kid. Rocklock comments. Yeah, everybody will keep an eye out for him. Amplifier agrees. Shoyuta really hoped that Viridian's sudden disappearance didn't mean anything, that maybe the kid's parents had somehow found out about his nightly activities and that they had forced him to stop, or maybe that he had just gotten bored, but deep down, he knew that wasn't the case. The problem child had thrown himself headfirst into vigilantism to the point where he had become entrenched in the city's hero scene in only a few months, and the kid seemed to enjoy it, so Shoyuta couldn't imagine that he'd ever give that up, not unless. He's alright or he will be. Dobby huffed, losing a bit of his tension. He shook his head and put away his phone. It wouldn't do any good to worry himself into exhaustion. The most he could do was keep an eye on the obituaries and hope to every deity he knew that Viridian hadn't decided that suicide by villain was taking too long. Maybe he was just reading too far into things and Viridian's mental health wasn't nearly as bad as it seemed and he was just out of town. But if he was just out of town, then why hadn't he given any warning before disappearing? He got hurt, that's it, we promise. Hagakure whines. Shoyuta groaned and stretched as he emerged from his cocoon to get ready for his next class. Thankfully, his current class had responded well to his logical ruse, and he hadn't had to permanently expel that many of them, so he still had quite a few students who were actually showing promise now that they were taking things seriously. He just needed to remind himself that he had more than enough brats to worry about without fretting about the problem child. Didn't make things any easier, but it was the most logical course of action. Yes, let's be logical. Midnight drawls with a roll of her eyes. Hey, Shoyuta. Mick's yell made him flinch and wish he'd actually gotten a nap. You look like a mess, is something on your mind? Doesn't he always look like a mess? Snipe asked. What's the difference? Giggles snort savage. Gasps Shoyuta glared at him while Midnight struggled to hold back laughter. I can't explain it. Mike insisted. But Shoyuta has his normal dishevelment and his anxious dishevelment, and today, it looks like he's worried about something. Is one of your students giving you trouble? Not one of my official ones. Shoyuta muttered, but it didn't seem like anyone heard him. So Viridian really has been claimed. Shinso smirks. Oh, are you gonna expel someone else? Ectoplasm asked. Dang, I'm gonna lose the bet. Called it. Ashido cheers. Shoyuta glared at them. You shouldn't bet about how likely I am to expel my students. We're not betting on if you'll expel your students. Mike yelled. No, we're betting on when you'll expel your students. Midnight added helpfully. That's even better. Kaminari laughs. Shoyuta groaned. If you must know, I'm worried about something on my patrol. There's just a vigilante that's been hanging around and I haven't seen him for a while. I'm just hoping nothing's happened to him, that's all. Leaving out a few details their show. Mike deadpants. Midnight grinned. I knew you had a heart. What are you gonna do? There's not much I can do. Shoyuta grumbled. DMN, problem child. Well, Mike said, when he shows his face again, ground him. That'll teach him to mess with you. I hate you. Aizawa deadpants. Sure you do. Mike grins. Shoyuta rolled his eyes and ignored the sick sense of worry in his stomach that just wouldn't go away. He wished that he'd noticed Viridian's depression sooner. Maybe if he'd caught it before the kid had disappeared, he could have convinced the kid to get some therapy. Even if Viridian refused to go, Shoyuta still could have found some way to help so that the kid didn't feel like he had to. Well, he just hoped it wasn't too late. You're not sensei, Momo says sadly. But one thing was sure, if by some miracle, Viridian was still alive, Shoyuta wouldn't make the same mistake twice. His students cheer for his efforts and wish for his success. After changing out of his school clothes, Katsuki walked to the address he'd found on the internet. The building was plain, just a community center with a city playground off to one side and a couple of rooms for art classes and support groups, but he ignored them for right now and walked to the front desk. Lady behind it smiled at him as she waited for him to find the words. Stupid. Why was this so strong? You're emotionally constipated? Kaminari suggests with a cheeky grin, earning himself a glare. I was wondering, Katsuki cringed. He was practically stuttering almost like Deku. I was wondering if there was a hero named Amplifier here? I read on your website that. Is he gonna do what I think he is? Amplifier cheers. What do you want him to do? Aizawa asks. Shut up and find out. She commands. The receptionist nodded. Sure thing. Amplifier. She called back into the offices behind her. You got a visitor. Awesome. Amplifier was a lot bouncier than Katsuki had been expecting. Considering the program that the website said she ran, he'd been expecting her to look a lot more intimidating. What can I do for you, kid? Booze. Amplifier squeals. Katsuki's mouth went dry, and the only thing that kept him from running out the door was the fact that he wasn't some city coward. You're the F-cur that runs the rehabilitation group for villains on probation, right? Amplifier blinked a few times before she grinned. That's me. We meet once a week and focus on rehabilitation and personal development. It's been really effective, and we have a meeting starting in just a few minutes, but then you probably already know that, considering that you're here. Do you have a note from your probation officer? I'm not F-king. Katsuki forced himself to calm down. I'm not on probation. Your website said you could use a couple extra hands, so he took a deep breath. I want to volunteer. Character development. Bakugo's going down the redemption route. You got this. Good luck. We're so proud of you. Bakugo is slumped in his seat, face a little red, and grumbles, can we move on already? Headcase giggles at the boy before calling the room to order as the next chapter plays. Cheat code support strategist starting line. Hitoshi's mind was still reeling by the time they arrived at a large door that obviously led into a support lab. What did Midoriya mean when he said they were going to help him get into the hero course? Could they even do that? He was knocked out of his stupor, quite literally, when the door blew off its hinges and threw him and Midoriya against the far wall of the hallway. It didn't hurt as bad as he would have expected, and honestly, he was more dazed than hurt, but maybe that had something to do with the whole situation and not the fact that he'd just gotten thrown against a wall and was now sitting on the hallway floor. Typical. Maijima sighs. Midoriya yelled. You could have hurt us. Don't worry, Aizawa, that was just a disorienting blast. A girl with bright pink hair and coveralls tied around her waist appeared in the doorway, nonchalantly moving a giant pair of goggles from her face to her head as if she hadn't just blown up half the hallway. They'll cause damage to things, but not to people. Perfect for hostage situations. Midoriya scrambled to his feet and grabbed a notebook from his pocket. How does that affect people like Cementos who are, objectively, made from things? There's a kid in 1A who can turn into rock and another in 1B who can turn into steel. Would they be affected? Would it only damage them when their quirks are activated? Or is the damage caused because the thing is non-living, in which case quirks wouldn't affect it because the person with the quirk is still alive? What about? Do you think they'd join us for some experiments? Mayas. We could ask. Izuku turns toward the Baku squad. Hey Kirishima, what do you think about weapons testing? I'm in, man. Kirishima agrees enthusiastically. Not without adult supervision. Maijima and Aizawa demand in unison. Izuku and Ijiro easily agree while Mei pouts. Tetsu chimes in to volunteer to join them. What the? A hero that Hitoshi assumed was Power Loader appeared in the doorway, his hands going to his helmet as he took in the scene. Hatsum, I literally looked away for 2 seconds. Well, technically, an explosion takes only a fraction of a second to begin. Midoriya began. But the actual chemical reaction can take several seconds to run its course, depending on the chemicals involved, but you wouldn't be able to stop it once it reached the activation energy. Not helping Midoriya. Shinso deadpants. Didn't you two promise to not bother the other students if I let you bring Shinso here? Power Loader asked. Oh, it's a support lab. Hatsum dismissed. Explosions are normal. We're not bothering. Shut the FCK up and go to your boyfriend's room already. A female voice called out loudly from inside the classroom. Midoriya turned bright red and sputtered, but Hatsum apparently didn't care about whatever her classmate was implying, because she simply zeroed in on Hitoshi and leaned down until she was only inches away from his face. He instinctively pressed himself as far against the wall as he could, which unfortunately wasn't very far. Personal space Hatsum. Shinso warns while she pouts. She smiled at him manically. You must be extra credit Kun. Izukans told me so much about you. We're gonna have so much fun. Hitoshi simply blinked at her as he waited for his brain to catch up and maybe, just maybe, make sense of her words. Extra credit Kun? The nickname threw him off even more. Toga chuckled, elbowing Dobby to get him to stop sulking. Midoriya shoved her away from him and shook his head as he helped Hitoshi up. You can't just call people by nicknames like that the first time you meet them. Shinso has a name. Not important. Hatsum dismissed. What's important is that I'm going to make his babies. Hitoshi choked on nothing and almost fell back onto the floor again as the crazy girl grabbed his hand and pulled him into the lab with Midoriya following close behind. He barely got a glimpse of the other students before he was yanked into a small dark room lined with computers and the door shut ominously behind him, trapping him with the two crazy students who had just kidnapped him. Was being a hero really worth all this? Shinso deadpants. Yes, it was. Hitoshi took a deep breath and looked at his kidnappers with a well-practiced bored expression. So, are you gonna explain what's going on now? Hatsum turned and slapped Midoriya's chest. Aizawa-kun, why didn't you explain anything to extra credit Kun? I was waiting for you. Midoriya defended. I thought you wanted. Don't let me hold us back. Mei insisted. Don't waste time on my account as in, we have work to do. Hatsum turned back to Hitoshi. You, extra credit Kun, are our new project. Hitoshi didn't think that explained anything except for the nickname he'd apparently acquired, but thankfully Midoriya was a little more willing to fill in the gaps. Power Loader has agreed to give us extra credit if we use our skills to help you. Midoriya sighed as he turned on the lights and sat down in front of the line of computers. I'm an analyst and Mei-chan is obviously an inventor, so we're going to, well, be your support, I guess? I'll help you analyze and train your quirk and she'll make you a support item that you can use in the sports festival next month to give you the best possible chance of transferring into the hero course. Honestly, it's ridiculous that they wouldn't let you in the hero course in the first place, but at least now you can prove everyone wrong, right? You make it sound so simple. Shinso sighs. That's because we haven't started yet. Izuku waves him off. What's that mean? You'll see. Hitoshi thought about that. For a long moment. So you're basically going to train me to be a hero so you can get extra credit? Midoriya smiled awkwardly. Yes? I mean, only if that's okay. We don't have to if you don't want us to. I mean, I get that we can kinda be a lot sometimes and... Don't give him a choice, Aizawa-kun. Hatsum exclaimed. We're helping you and that's final. Okay, extra credit Kun? Kidnappers is a good term for them. Dobby murmurs. Hitoshi couldn't help snorting. Well, I'm not exactly in a position to say no, but are you sure you even want to help a kid with a villain's quirk become even more dangerous? What if I go rogue like everyone's always told me? His kidnappers obviously hadn't missed any of the bitterness in Hitoshi's voice, because they shared a glance and when Hatsum responded, she sounded angry. Okay, that's it. You're gonna win this and we're gonna prove those a-holes wrong. I am so sick of people being rude to my friends just because of downright stupid prejudices. We need names. Uraraka growls. How much time you got? Shinso grins. Shinso no. Ida scolds. Shinso yes. Mei cheers. Friends? Hitoshi's brain went blank. Hatsum couldn't possibly be including him in that, could she? They'd literally just met. But then she'd already talked about having his babies. Whatever the hell that meant. He's so lost. Jiro snorts. It's best not to fight her friendship. Midoriya gave him a small, determined smile. When Mei-chan gets something in her brain, it's best to just roll with it. So, let's start with your quirk. It's brainwashing, right? Verbal response based? Hitoshi nodded, still reeling. But, I can't control higher brain functions, just basically make the person into a puppet. Midoriya had whipped out a notebook and was rapidly writing down everything Hitoshi was saying. How do they snap out of it? Do you have to release your control? Hitoshi shrugged. I can, like if they complete all the orders I gave them, but it's more common for someone else to jostle them, which can break my hold. That's how most of my classmates rescued anyone they thought I'd used my quirk on. Taking notes. Twice assures feel like sit for it. Midoriya ignored Hatsume's annoyed buzzing next to him. Ask me a question. Hitoshi asked suspiciously. Midoriya grinned. So you can brainwash me, of course. I need to know how it feels to be on the receiving end, and it'll help me explore your limits. His eyes went blank as Hitoshi took control, glancing over at Hatsume, expecting her to be creeped out at the very least. To his surprise, however, she just looked excited and grabbed Midoriya's notebook from his lax grip, flipping through some of the pages until she'd found what she was looking for. Okay. Aizawa already made a list of orders he wants you to give him, so let's start. Tell him to stand on one foot. Do we have to do these things when we get back? Shinso asks. Headcase told us that quirks vary in function and capabilities between worlds, so it's better safe than sorry. Izuku informs. Hitoshi hesitated, glancing between Hatsume and Izuku. He'd learned the strong way not to give anyone any functional orders without their express permission. I should ask him first. Well then, just ask him now. Hatsume said impatiently. It'll be another experiment to see if he tells the truth under your quirk. It doesn't work like that. Hitoshi griped and turned to Midoriya. Tell me whether or not you're okay with me giving you orders. Just as he'd expected, Midoriya simply sat and stared at him blankly. Hitoshi turned back to Hatsume, who looked vaguely disappointed. See? Verbal responses count as a higher brain function. I'm just gonna wake him up and ask. Izuku writes enthusiastically in a notebook, a small frown appearing briefly at the failed experiment. Hitoshi released his hold and watched nervously as the light came back into Midoriya's eyes. Sure, he'd said that he wanted Hitoshi to brainwash him, but what if he got angry? It turned out that Hitoshi didn't have anything to be worried about, because the moment Midoriya was in control of himself again, he just shook his head and grinned brightly. You're so strange. Shinso shook his head. I know. Izuku shrugged, sparing another glance at the still carefully blank Todoroki. That was so cool. Midoriya grabbed his notebook back from Hatsume and scribbled a few things down before handing the notebook to Hitoshi. Okay, so this time I want you to tell me to do the things on this list, and if I haven't woken up by the end of it, Mei, could you jostle me to wake me up? I want to compare that to Shinso releasing his control voluntarily. Sure thing, Aizawa. Hatsume grinned and grabbed her phone to start recording the session. Ready? Do you think you'll wake up before the end? Hitoshi couldn't help asking. He had to ask a question to establish control anyway, so he may as well as one he was curious about. I don't know, Midoriya said. It'll depend on how your quirk deals with impossible orders. Excuse me? Shinso looks at the green boy with a raised eyebrow. Just watch. Izuku grins back at him. Okay? Hitoshi was pretty sure that they'd already figured that out since Midoriya had just done nothing rather than answer his question earlier, but apparently, he was no longer the expert on his own quirk. That's normal for Midoriya, Karo. Tsu smiles. He quickly took control of Midoriya and started going down the list. Most of the orders were easy things like stand up, sit down, stand on one foot, etc. The most interesting thing that happened was when Hitoshi ordered Midoriya to sit down on a stool. There wasn't a stool in the little room they were in, so to Hitoshi's surprise, Midoriya actually took the initiative to leave the room and go sit on the stool out by Powerloader's desk. Hitoshi almost died of embarrassment as he ran after Midoriya, frantically apologizing to the other support students, but he finally decided that their classmates must be used to their antics because the only response they gave to their classmate coming out practically brain-dead was a few curious glances and a few giggles to Powerloader's exasperation. That could be dangerous. Maijima groans. Shinso, I'm assuming you're currently in control of Midoriya? Powerloader asked with a sigh. Hitoshi froze. This was it. This was how he got expelled from UA. He should have known better than to brainwash a UA student, even with their permission, and now he was going to get punished for his stupidity. He should have known this whole situation was too good to be true. He stared at the floor, clamping down on his anger and disappointment. Yes, sir. I'll release him from my quirk right away. Hell no. Maijima Sensei isn't like that. Mei shouts. There's no need for that. Powerloader said. I'm sure you're in the middle of an experiment, right? Hitoshi hesitantly nodded. Was Powerloader just going to accept that? He wasn't going to expel him for using his quirk on a fellow student. Apparently not, because Power Loader simply nodded as if this situation were completely normal. Or as normal as any situation could be when Midoriya and Hatsum were involved. Shinso, please tell Midoriya to get back into his room. Power Loader said. And make sure he doesn't run into anything dangerous on the way back. There are power tools in here. Hitoshi nodded frantically, grateful that he had somehow avoided getting expelled, and ordered Midoriya to go back to Hatsum, who was currently rolling on the floor of the little room dying of laughter. With his luck, he could just imagine Midoriya trying to walk all the way back home completely brainwashed if he told him to go to his room. That would be hilarious. Kaminari Chutles. After that minor blip, everything went smoothly. Everything, that was, until Hitoshi read the last order on Midoriya's list. Hatsum? Hitoshi pointed to the page. Does he really want me to order him to do this? Don't call me Hatsum, extra credit Kuin, Mei-chan is fine. Hatsum leaned over and read the order. That one's actually a pretty important experiment, so yeah, he definitely wants you to do it. Oak. Hitoshi took a deep breath and looked at Midoriya, who was waiting in the middle of the room. Do a backflip. Midoriya squatted and jumped backward, only to hit the ground as his attempt at a backflip completely failed. Hiss, that's got to hurt. Midoriya groaned and rolled over, the impact more than enough to knock him from Hitoshi's control. Okay, so the person will still try to complete impossible commands, but won't be able to if the task is outside their ability level. Nice to know. I am so sorry. Hitoshi ran to help him up. I shouldn't have given you that order. Are you hurt? Do you need me to leave? I'm so sorry, I should stop asking questions. I'm probably making you really uncomfortable. Midoriya just laughed with a wince. No. I put that on there on purpose. It was the only thing I could think of that, while theoretically possible, wasn't a skill that I have. My first thought was that I would just wake up when given the order, or maybe my brain would subconsciously know how to complete the task. Wait, do you know how to do a backflip? Do I look like I know how to do a backflip? Hitoshi deadpanned. And why would that even matter? Izuku grinned at the boy. Because your quirk could be connecting your target's body to your brain instead of theirs. Midoriya explained as he took back his notebook. Mei, make a note that we should ask Recovery Girl if she has access to some kind of brain scanner. We need to know whose brain lights up when tasks are being done, Shinso's or his target's. Will do, Izukin. Hatsum said happily. I could probably build one myself. Izuku, Shinso, and Power Loader say together. Hitoshi couldn't help but feel like he was intruding as both of them dissolved into muttering and wrote down their observations in their respective notebooks. He was starting to wonder if he should just go back to class when one of Midoriya's more coherent mutterings caught his attention. And we know you can modify memories, so... No, I can't. Hitoshi interrupted before he could stop himself, and he leaned back slightly when both of his kidnappers stopped their note-taking to stare at him. You didn't know you could do that? Izuku asked. I still don't know. Shinso confirmed. But it's been mentioned in more than one story, so it's more likely to be true, right? Uraraka questions. Something to test. Shinso shrugged. Midoriya frowned. But in the footage, you could. I don't know what you think you saw, but Hitoshi shrugged helplessly. I mean, I've never actually tried it. I would have gotten in way too much trouble for something like that. But I can't even make someone answer a question, so I'm pretty sure I can't make someone forget something or anything like that. Midoriya tapped his cheek with his pencil a few times. Mei, what color is Shinso's hair? Hatsum grinned, purple. Midoriya nodded. Okay, now turn and face the wall. Shinso, put her under your quirk so we can try something. My turn. Mei cheers. Wait, were they actually going to try to modify Hatsum's memories? It seemed like that shouldn't be something she should be okay with, but when it came to these two, Shinso didn't really know if any normal rules applied. If she wants me to, I can, but she'd have to answer one of my questions. Oh. Even from the back, Hatsum's excitement was obvious. Do I get to be the test subject this time? Are you actually crazy? Hitoshi asked incredulously. Hatsum simply laughed. Probably. Snort ha. At least she knows. No hesitation. Hitoshi activated his quirk and shook his head in disbelief. These two had to be insane. Okay, what now? Midoriya thought for a second. Tell her to remember your hair being green. Hitoshi still didn't think this was actually going to work, so he went ahead and gave the order, then released his control. Midoriya smiled at him, then turned to Hatsum. Okay, Heian, before you turn around, what color is Shinso's hair? Is this a trick question? Hatsum sounded confused. It's green, just like yours, Aizawa. I thought you guys were going to mess with my memories or something. Silent celebration spreads through the room as people bounce in their seats and rub their hands together. Hitoshi's jaw dropped and Midoriya's face split into a bright grin. Turn around. Hatsum turned quickly and did a double take as soon as she saw Hitoshi. Whoa. That's so trippy. Hitoshi couldn't even think. He hadn't even known he could do that. Until he'd seen her reaction, he'd half thought they were just being nice or something, but he'd actually changed her memories. How? How did you know I could do that? Izuku smiled. I watched your entrance exam. That other examinee you got in a fight with? I know him. He wouldn't have let something like that slide unless he actually had forgotten about you like you ordered. All that was left was confirming the theory. You do petty well. Shinso snarks. I try. Izuku giggles. Hatsum grinned and leaned close to his face. I'm gonna have so much fun making your babies. Phrasing. Hitoshi walked into class 1C at the end of the hour shell-shocked and with a smear of soot on his cheek that he hadn't gotten around to wiping off after Hatsum's welcome explosion. The moment that present Mike saw him, the corners of his mouth started twitching and it was obvious that he was holding back giggles. So, how was it? I think I just made a deal with the devil. Hitoshi said numbly. Actually, 2 devils. Is that worse? It feels like that's worse. Mei dismisses its way better. This time, Mike-sensei didn't even bother to hold back his laughter. Yeah, the support course is like that. Go ahead and take a seat. Hitoshi ignored his classmates' whispers as he made his way to his seat and took out his things for the next lesson. Yes, Midoriya and Hatsum were overwhelming, but in less than an hour, they discovered things about his quirk that Hitoshi hadn't even realized after 10 years of having it. If anyone at UA could get him into the hero course, it was his kidnappers. So if those 2 really were demons, Hitoshi couldn't quite bring himself to regret signing away his soul. One of us. 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 Mei chants Izuku and Uraraka join in. Ida sighs and Todoroki seems like he's starting to relax again. Tsu chuckles at Shinsu's look of sudden exhaustion. The next chapter plays with a tired crowd lazily gathering dinner. Now playing Shadows, the horror movie hero's permission. Hitoshi nervously straightened the paper again as he and Midoriya walked up to his foster home. It wasn't like the paper was that valuable. They just used the printer at the library to make a few copies of the permission waiver for the UA training exercise, so printing another wouldn't be a big deal or anything, but the paper felt valuable just because of what it represented. If they could both convince their parents, well, in Hitoshi's case, his guardians, to approve it, then they'd not only be able to practice all the strategies they were learning but see how they matched up in a real fight against UA students. He wasn't sure how far they'd get, obviously, since the UA students would have way more training than the 2 of them, but Midoriya was right, it would be a good way to get their names out there and make themselves stand out from the tens of thousands of other kids who would be trying for the hero course next year. And potentially traumatize your would-be senpai. Amajiki shivers. Assuming they could actually convince their guardians to sign off on it. He held open the door for Midoriya and waited for him to take off his shoes before leading him back into the kitchen. His foster parents should be home now, and even though they'd be tired from work, there probably wasn't any better time to have this conversation. That didn't mean that Hitoshi wasn't tempted to turn around and run in the other direction rather than risk getting in trouble though. I understand that. Todoroki mumbles. His foster dad was sitting at the table reading a newspaper as his foster mom made dinner, but neither of them saw the 2 of them come in. Hitoshi scuffed the floor with his heel, making just enough non-vocal noise to get his foster dad to look up from his paper. Hitoshi's stomach sunk as he did a double take between Hitoshi and Midoriya before his face hardened into a clearly displeased expression. Hitoshi, you didn't tell us you'd be bringing a friend over. Oh sorry. Midoriya had an innocently guilty expression on his face. I kinda insisted on coming over at the last minute and I was totally talking Shinso's ear off, so he didn't really have time to text you. Right, you're probably wondering. My name is Izuku Midoriya. You 2 must be Shinso's parents. Taking the blame so Shinso won't get in trouble is, sadly, a good idea. Shoji mentions. Foster dad frowned. but looked a lot less angry than before, which made Hitoshi relax slightly. Having Midoriya take the blame for a last-minute visit seemed like it had been a good plan, even though the truth was that they'd planned it, but his foster parents didn't really like him talking to them at all, even though he'd already tried telling them that his quirk didn't work over texting. Midoriya, however, was just energetic enough that they'd both decided he might be able to pass it off as an accident. It's believable. Uraraka nods. So you go to school with Hitoshi? Foster mom asked. No, we met after school one day. Midoriya replied brightly. The kids at my own school don't really like me. Hitoshi caught a gleam of satisfaction in Midoriya's eyes as his foster mom frowned in pity. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Sure. Jiro huffed. Midoriya shrugged but didn't respond. To have the greatest chance of success, they needed to fit themselves into the narrative that his foster parents already believed, namely, that Hitoshi was dangerous and that no one would willingly be friends with him. They would be more likely to believe Midoriya was hanging out with him because he lacked better options and it was safer than them thinking that Hitoshi was somehow manipulating, or worse brainwashing, him into being friends. Hence, the careful reluctance, which seemed to be working perfectly. They shouldn't have to do this just to be friends. Mike growls. Hopefully their situation will improve sooner rather than later. Hound Dog agrees. So, Midoriya. Foster dad closed his newspaper. Are you here for dinner or? Midoriya grabbed the paper from Hitoshi like he just barely remembered it. I actually wanted to ask you guys something. I'm going to be going to this camp and I was wondering if Shinso could come along? It doesn't cost anything, but we do need parental permission. The camp? Foster dad hesitantly accepted the paper from Midoriya. What kind of camp? Well, it's kind of a training camp? Midoriya grimaced. You see, I kinda want to be a hero, but honestly I don't really have a very good chance, so this is kinda to help me get a better idea of everything and see if it's even possible, you know? Foster dad hummed thoughtfully, but Hitoshi could tell he was still on the fence. And you want Hitoshi to come with you? You know he doesn't have a good shot at being a hero either, right? I think Hitoshi can be a great hero. Midoriya said firmly, eyes widening after a moment as he noticed his slip. But, I mostly just want him there so I don't have to be alone. It's an entire week and we sleep there, so he wouldn't be home for an entire week. I know that's probably a deal breaker, but no, that'll work. Foster dad said quickly, pen flourishing across the paper. Just be careful, kid, okay? Anything to get rid of me. Shinso sneers. Hitoshi fought back a smile as Izuku grinned triumphantly. Don't worry, I will be. Maybe. Mei teases. Kyoka blew a strand of hair out of her face, only for it to fall right back in front of her eyes. She would have just used her hand to brush it back, but both her hands were kind of busy at the moment lugging around a broken microwave. She'd never really been the strongest girl out there, so after less than a week of All Might's crazy clean the beach routine, her arms already felt like they were about to fall off. She was sure that the extra muscle would be useful and would really help her out in the hero course, but at the same time, this whole training program seemed just kinda illogical. Just wait for the piggyback rides. Izuku laughed. What do you mean by that? Jiro asks hesitantly. The whole carry the number 1 hero on your back through the sand training PRD. Izuku mentions offhandedly, unaware of the looks of shock spreading through his class. It wasn't that she was complaining. Okay, well, maybe she kinda was, but anybody would be complaining if they were asked to clean an entire polluted beach by themselves. Like, she saw the appeal of building muscle, and All Might had insisted that without enough muscle mass his quirk would blow her arms off, but there were still some things that just weren't adding up. First of all, she wasn't even sure she wanted one for all. Sure, All Might and Recovery Girl had both said it was an amazing opportunity, and if she'd been allowed to tell her parents, she had no doubt that her dad would be pushing her to jump in with 2 feet, but for now, all she'd committed to doing was train to receive the quirk. Allowed to tell her parents? Aizawa growls. All Might shrinks in his seat, wisely keeping his opinions to himself. So far, all that meant was a lot of muscle training, which, again, didn't make a whole lot of sense. One for all focused on strength, obviously. Anyone who had ever seen All Might fight could see that much, but at the same time, Kyoka just couldn't bring herself to believe that's all there was to it. Quirks just weren't that simple. Take her own quirk for example. Sure, it enhanced her hearing, but it also allowed her to project her heartbeat, not to mention the fact that it had a mutation element to it as well. It didn't fall into a neat little category because her quirk wasn't a one-trick pony, and she was pretty sure that was true for most quirks. One for all shouldn't be any different. Izuku starts laughing loudly. Oh, it's not. She dumped the microwave in the truck they were using and stretched out her arms as she walked back to get another piece of garbage. All Might was a strong hero, but his go-to solution was usually to punch things, which meant that for him, the solution was always to have bigger muscles than his opponent and force his way to victory by sheer strength and force of will, but was. Much as Kyoka hated criticizing All Might, that didn't always work. When she was singing, muscling through a difficult passage could do more harm than good. Instead of trying to get stronger in that case, the best thing to do was improve the technique and airflow so that she got a good quality sound without hurting herself. It was the same with her instruments. A guitar could be made of the strongest wood on earth, but if the player didn't know how to use it, it would still sound terrible. There had to be some technical elements to using one for all that she should be preparing for in addition to just building muscle. She's figuring this out way faster than I did. Izuku looks a mix of proud and defeated. She doesn't have the hero worship blinding her. Uraraka points out. Kyoka sighed and picked up a tire. Maybe she was just overcomplicating things. All Might seemed to be doing okay for himself, and he only focused on muscle strength. Besides, who else was she supposed to ask? All Might had insisted that One for All was a huge secret that only a small handful knew about, so her best option was probably just to keep learning from them and assume that All Might knew what he was doing. He was the expert after all, right? Not at all. Torino growls. No, Tsukachi, I don't need either of their help. I've had One for All for decades now. I know what I'm doing. Kyoka paused as she heard All Might's voice filtering through the piles of trash. She wasn't quite sure where he was, but he was talking loud enough that her enhanced hearing could pick him up easily enough, even over the sound of the waves. Whoever he was talking to obviously knew about One for All, but All Might hadn't ever told her about anyone named Tsukachi before. I'm not saying you don't, but they might still be able to help. Tsukachi's voice was distorted in a way that meant that this was a phone call and Kyoka was tempted to walk away so she wouldn't overhear, but if All Might was going to be giving her his quirk, he didn't have any right to keep secrets about it. I mean, Nana got help from Gran Torino when she was training you, right? Good, the periodic bomb drops about One for All are annoying. Izuku nods in approval. Nana only relied on Gran Torino to guide me because she knew what that monster would do to her, and to me if she left me without any guidance. All Might said coldly, I can handle this. I'm going to be teaching at UA as well, so I'm going to have to learn sometime. Also, Gran Torino is absolutely terrifying. Young Jiro still has a lot of work ahead of her and I don't want him traumatizing her. Okay, fair. Izuku concedes confusing most. Well, what about Night Eye? Tsukachi asked. Have you even told him you found a successor? There was a long moment of silence before All Might answered, We haven't spoken to each other in years, Tsukachi. I doubt telling him now would go over very well. It won't. Izuku sighs. Kyoka shifted the tire so that it was on her shoulder and she could grab her phone with her other hand, sending herself a message with the names All Might and this Tsukachi dude had mentioned. Maybe there were other people she could ask for advice. It never hurt to get a new perspective, right? Izuku is laughing again. I don't know who to be more afraid for, Jiro or All Might. Unlike Hitoshi's foster parents, Izuku's mom actually read the whole permission slip before looking up at them worriedly. This says you might get hurt, baby. Are you sure you want to do this? It's the best way to figure out what being a hero really is. Izuku insisted, grateful for Hitoshi's presence at his side during this conversation. I know that it looks really cool on TV and that every little kid wants to be a hero, but I'm not a little kid anymore. I know this exercise might be dangerous, but it's way more controlled than typical hero work. They have Recovery Girl, who's the best healing hero working right now, and all sorts of other precautions to keep people from getting hurt in the first place. It'll give me a good sense of what the hero industry actually is, and I'd really rather know now if it's really too dangerous for me rather than figure that out in the middle of an actual hero fight where I could get seriously injured. Using her fear against her. Aizawa processes he learns quick. Mom bit her lip and looked down at the paper again. So you think this exercise will help you decide whether you can really handle being a hero? Even though he knew it was coming, Izuku's stomach still sank. He'd been the one to come up with the strategy of fitting their request for permission into their parents' existing prejudices, but it still stung that the only way to get his mom to say yes was to let her believe that this was the final push he needed to give up on his dream. He swallowed his nausea and forced himself to smile. Yeah, that's basically the point of the exercise. Mom nodded and turned to Hitoshi. And you're going with him? Hitoshi nodded. It's safer to have someone there so we can watch each other's backs. Mom was tense for a moment, but after it became clear that Hitoshi wasn't going to ask her a question, she relaxed and picked up the pen. Okay, but I need you to promise to be careful, okay baby? Don't take any unnecessary risks, and if there's someone you don't think you can beat, just run, okay? Izuku nodded and he glanced over at Hitoshi, who looked just as happy and relieved as he felt. Don't worry. We'll make sure we can win. On that sad note, the screen shuts down for the night, the three Todorokis not sparing anyone so much as a glance on the way to the respective dorms. The rest of the crowd slowly followed after them for hopefully a decent sleep. In the morning, everyone is quieter than the day before but relaxes into their seats ready to continue. Now playing Deku? I think he's some pro. Battle training. Katsuki scowled as he got dressed in his brand new hero costume. Many of the other boys were gawking at Deku's outfit, especially the variety of weapons strapped all over his body, including 2 pistols. How did he even get those? More importantly, how did a quirkless loser like him even get into UA? This is gonna be a disaster. Izuku mumbles. Yeah, he'd admit that the strategy he'd used to beat the teacher was somewhat impressive, but the nerd didn't even do any of the work. It was the people with quirks who did all the fighting, and that was how it'd always be. So where did the stupid teachers get off on letting a useless loser like Deku into the top hero school in the country? And getting in on recommendations? What kind of a joke was that? This was supposed to be his epic origin story, and Deku was ruining it on purpose. Wow, in hindsight I sound like a child. Bakugo grumbles. The fact that you can admit that is a good sign. Kirishima grins proudly. Whatever. Hopefully, he'd have an excuse to beat the nerd up during battle training. If not, well, there'd always be after school. The word expelled echoes loudly. You all look like heroes. All Might declared proudly as they all stepped out of the tunnel. Katsuki thought it was odd that Deku wasn't fanboying like everyone else in the class. In fact, he almost seemed nervous, like he was trying to avoid looking All Might in the eye or something. Not that Katsuki cared, but it seemed way out of character. On the other hand, All Might's eyes kept lingering on Deku, like he knew he recognized him from somewhere, but couldn't quite place him or something. It was really pissing Katsuki off. Now that is going to be a disaster. Shinso comments. All Might explained that they'd be fighting indoor battles in teams of 2 and Katsuki tuned him out. Indoor battles, teams of 2, don't forget the bomb, got it. Now stop yammering, he wanted to fight already. Dude. Zero deadpants. I know. Bakugo groans. He rolled his eyes when he was paired with the furried freak. What was that extra's quirk again? It couldn't have been anything too cool if he hung out with Deku at lunch. All Might pulled out the first 2 teams to fight with a flourish and Katsuki smirked. Looks like he'd get to P&D Deku into the ground sooner rather than later. I hope it's bloody. Toga giggles. His smile widened as he saw Deku gulp and glance over at him with fear in his eyes, but fell when the nerd suddenly clenched his fists and turned to him with determination. Katsuki gave Deku his best glare before stalking off into the building with 4 eyes. This time, he'd make sure that loser learned his lesson. A decade and some change of knowing me and he still underestimates how stubborn I am. Izuku shakes his head. The fake weapon was in a room on the 3rd floor and didn't take long to find. Ida strode up to it and knocked on the side. The bomb made a hollow clanging sound. So this is the weapon we're supposed to protect. Katsuki scoffed and clenched his fists. He could care less about the stupid weapon. Hey 4 eyes, he kept looking at the door. Do you really think Deku deserves to be in the hero course? You saw how well he strategized. Ida said. And he did get on recommendations, a feat which escaped even me, so I believe he has earned his spot in the hero course. Why do you seem so angry when it comes to him? Good question. Izuku grumbled. Katsuki saw red. That nerd was tricking him all these months. pretending to give up on being a hero, pretending that he'd finally learned how useless he really was, when all along he was training with pro heroes. Why didn't those heroes take an interest in Katsuki? He would obviously be a better hero than Deku, everyone said so. So why did the loser get in on recommendations and get a cooler origin story than he did? Deku didn't even have a quirk. If there was anything that Katsuki was sure about in this exercise, it was that he was going to kill that DMN nerd. Not literally. Bakugo claims. Do you think they want us to memorize the floor plan? Uraraka asked. Izuku shrugged. I don't know, I already did anyway. It's helpful to have a mental map so you don't get lost. Uraraka stared at him with wide eyes before changing the subject. You know, All Might's just as cool in person as he is on television. I'm glad he's not threatening to expel us like Aizawa did. Nice to know I'm doing something right. All Might chuckles as Aizawa rolls his eyes at the man. Izuku sat silently for a minute, the paper in his hand becoming hopelessly wrinkled from how tightly he was gripping it. Between realizing that he'd have to deal with the hero that had tried to crush his dreams for the whole semester and being faced with Kaken who he knew would try to kill him, his nerves were shot. Suddenly, Izuku remembered that it was probably appropriate to say something when a girl asked you a question. Yeah, sure. You can feel the stress rolling off him. Ajuru comments. Uraraka looked at him with concern. Are you okay, Deku? You look kinda tense. Izuku sighed. It's just we're going up against Kachen. Plus Ida's pretty strong too. We should be on our guard, who knows what they'll pull. Oh right, Bakugo's the one who's always making fun of you. Izuku nodded. He can be a pain, but his strength, his confidence, his ambition, not to mention his quirk, they're all so much greater than mine. He's pretty mad that you're at UA, isn't he? Uraraka asked. Izuku gave a breathy laugh. Yep. That's why he's going to come after me as soon as All Might says go. It doesn't matter that the safer strategy would be for him to guard the bomb and send Ida out to find us. For him, this is personal and nothing anyone says is going to convince him otherwise. He stood. But that's why I have to do better. I refuse to lose today. That's familiar. Uraraka smiles. Uraraka got a strange glint in her eye. So it's a fated battle between rivals, huh? Not that I'm trying to get you wrapped up in my fight or anything. Izuku waved his arms in denial. Are you kidding? Uraraka laughed and hit a fist against her palm. Let's win this. That day would have been so much worse without you. Izuku elbows Uraraka lightly. All Might's voice came over the speaker, making them jump. Your time starts now. Immediately, Izuku snapped into analyst mode. Okay, so they're probably expecting us to come in through the front door. Can you use your quirk on yourself? Uraraka grimaced, only as a last resort. It makes me really sick. Izuku nodded, then grabbed his grappling hook from its holster, shot it so that it lodged into the wall right above the fourth-story window, and handed it to Uraraka. Okay, so this button will retract it and this one will dislodge the hook from wherever it is. If you need to shoot it again, just aim and press this button right here. Got it? That type of tool would pair well with your quirk. Todoroki mentions. Yeah, I could make a wrist-mounted one. Mei claims excitedly already designing it. Uraraka looked overwhelmed, but nodded. Is it strong enough to handle both of us? Izuku looked up at the building. It doesn't need to be. I'll be going in through the front door and leading Kaken on a wild goose chase. You'll find Ida and the bomb. Get it if you can, but if not, just tell me where it is and I'll try to beat Kachen and come help you. Are you sure you can handle him on your own? Uraraka asked worriedly. Izuku smiled. Kaken may have bombs. He patted the holster on his thigh, but I have guns. Hell yeah. Kick his butt. Fight, fight, fight. Uraraka smiled and nodded before pressing the button to retract the hook and disengage through the open window, pulling the hook through behind her. Izuku waited a moment before walking in through the front door. He'd taken a lot of notes on indoor battles over the years, but even more so since he'd started working with underground heroes. He'd even done an indoor battle during the Drag Cartel raid, so the setting didn't scare him. His opponent, however, did. Considering the history, that's understandable. Hound Dog comments. Suddenly, Kaken rounded a corner, aiming an explosion right at Izuku's face. He rolled out of the way, just in time, thankful for the fast reflexes he'd gotten from his specialized training. Thick smoke and dust filled the hallway and through his comm, he heard Uraraka quietly ask if he was okay. Kaken emerged from the smoke with a sneer on his face. What's the matter, Deku? If you're afraid to stand up and fight me, maybe a quirkless coward like you shouldn't be at UA. Izuku stood up tall and looked him in the eye. I knew you'd come at me first and try to take me by surprise. Kachen grinned. I don't want to hurt you so bad that they have to stop the fight, he yelled as he prepared to throw a quirk-loaded punch, but I want to come close. I should have stopped it then and there. All Might sighed. You think? Aizawa snarked. Izuku grabbed Kaken's arm and flipped him over his shoulder. You always use a big right hook to start a fight, Kachen. He panted. I know because I've watched you for years. Maybe you should have paid more attention to that notebook you burned and threw away. Those analyses are what caught the attention of the heroes that recommended me. His teeth as Kachen began to get up. You can call me Deku, but I'm not the same defenseless, helpless kid anymore. From now on, Deku is the name of a hero. Woo, claim it. You tell him. Kachen lowered himself into a battle stance. Deku, he growled, you're shaking in your boots just looking at me, but you want to fight me anyway. His hands started popping with explosions. That's why I hate you. This kid makes no sense. Dobby groans. Kaken launched himself at Izuku, who tried to wrap the capture tape around his ankle. Next, Izuku knew that Kaken would get impatient and try to end the fight with a big punch, which he dodged. Kaken was starting to mix up his moves, so did that mean he was worried? If he couldn't easily predict his moves, it wouldn't be smart to fight him in close range. Izuku turned and ran down the hall before the smoke cleared, trying to come up with a plan. He heard Bakugo scream in rage, You've been laughing behind my back, Deku? Getting at all these heroes just to make me look bad. You're just a quirkless nobody, Deku. You'll never beat me. Yes, because everything in my life revolves around you. Izuku snaps and then takes a deep breath. Izuku knew that if he went and helped Uraraka now, Kaken would just follow him. So he had to take him down here. He'd taken down actual villains though, something Kaken hadn't ever done, so he knew he could do it, just as long as he didn't get too close to Kaken's hands. Stop hiding, Det. Izuku thought back to all the times he tried to assure Kaken that he wasn't trying to compete with him or be better than him, only to get bruises and burns for his troubles. His eyes lit up with determination. Maybe it was time to change his attitude. Yes, it is, Carol. Tsu agrees. Deku? Uraraka's voice came over the radio. Ida knows I'm here, sorry. He's monologuing right now, though. Izuku nodded and gripped the capture tape. They were probably running low on time. It was time to stop messing around and beat Kaken. He heard footsteps behind him and turned around to see Kaken smiling at him as he slowly walked closer. Since you're such a stalker, you probably already know that my quirk works by exploding my sweat, so just imagine what I could do if I had a lot of it. Izuku's eyes widened as Kaken slowly pulled the pin on his gauntlets. That's right, these babies aren't just for show. He didn't. Minoma gawked. 1A doesn't look surprised. Awaze pointed out. Which means it did happen. Kendo sighs. Bakugo. All Might's voice came over the radio. Don't do it. You'll kill him. He'll be fine as long as he dodges. Bakugo grinned widely and finished pulling the pin, letting loose a massive explosion. How was he not expelled for this? Shigaraki asks. FCK if I know. Dobby huffs. Come in. Come in, Midoriya. All Might was practically screaming through the radio and Izuku hissed in pain. He'd managed to roll behind a pillar just in time to dodge the explosion, but it had done nothing to shield him from the heat. He knew he probably had at least first-degree burns all over his body just from being too close to that blast. Who had approved that thing? He'd had to train for months to be able to carry a gun, and Bakugo just comes in with enough firepower to blow through the wall? I should review the support safety measures when we get back. Maijima admits. I agree. Tsukachi states sternly. Kaken had just tried to kill him. Something finally sealed in Izuku's brain, and he remembered what Night Eye had said. He was right, Kaken. No, Katsuki hadn't been his friend in a long time. Izuku smiled as an idea occurred to him, and he silently held himself closer to the pillar as he drew one of his guns from its holster. These gauntlets are awesome. Katsuki cackled. Even if you give it all you've got, you'll never beat me. Izuku waited for the smoke to clear, so he could aim properly. Katsuki would be expecting him to be curled on the ground in the fetal position. It would throw him for a loop when he was nowhere to be seen. Katsuki looked around, then ran over to the hole in the wall and looked down to see if Izuku had been thrown from the building in the explosion. "Deku, where'd you go?" "Here it comes." Kaminari grinned. 2 gunshots rang out clearly as Izuku fired, hitting Katsuki with a RBB bullet to each bicep, right where Tsukachi had taught him would cause enough pain to temporarily paralyze the arm. Katsuki's eyes widened as Izuku ran at him and swiped his legs out from under him, landing him flat on his back. Quickly, Izuku took the capture tape and wrapped it around each of Katsuki's wrists before standing. "Bakugo has been captured by the hero team." "Yeah, good job. He did it. You've always been amazing, Katsuki." Izuku looked down at Katsuki as his eyes widened at the lack of a nickname. "That's why I had to beat you. I'm coming, Uraraka." "Where are you?" "Fifth floor, hurry." "Ida cleared the room of everything except the weapon, so I don't have any ammo for my quirk. You should get a throwing weapon." Mei mentions. Uraraka nods along totally. Izuku turned and ran, making his way up the stairs as quickly as he could. He could hear Ida laughing evilly and monologuing. He opened his pocket and grabbed a small box of RBB bullets that he kept on him in case he had to reload. He tossed a smoke bomb inside the room to cover him as he ran toward Uraraka and shoved the box into her hands, then pulled out his gun and ducked behind another pillar. Uraraka immediately started pelting Ida with weightless bullets, turning the room into a giant pin machine and forcing Ida to spend all his energy dodging. "That looks like a nightmare." Ida complains. "Nah, that looks hilarious." Shinso teases. "Were you hero?" Ida yelled. "You may have taken down my partner, but there is no way I will go down so easily." "Hiding is an act of cowardice. Or an act of intelligence," Izuku said cheekily as he stepped out from behind the pillar and shot Ida in the leg. "Oh, Brave would be so proud." Uraraka released her quirk and all the ricocheting projectiles fell to the floor as their gravity returned. She ran over and touched the bomb as Izuku tied Ida up with capture tape. A well-executed plan indeed. The hero team wins. "There!" Uraraka cried as she flung herself at Izuku and wrapped her arms around him. "We did it!" Izuku hissed in pain as she squeezed his burns. He'd hardly felt the pain during the fight, but now that the adrenaline was going down he realized just how much having first-degree burns over his whole body hurt. "Deku?" Uraraka jumped back. "Are you okay?" Izuku gave her a shaky smile, then promptly passed out. "Yeah, the tracks." Uraraka chuckled. "Now to watch my kidnapping." Todoroki sighs with his arm crossed. The rest of the squad wince, glancing over to Dobby to see him in the same stance as their friend. Unknowing what to say, they simply lean closer to him as the next chapter plays. Now playing Mastermind strategist for hire training camp. The UA trader rolled his eyes at his classmates' antics as the bus rolled to a stop. He quickly sent a text sharing his location with Shigaraki. This would show those Class A a-holes. Monoma whined. Why did Shudo have to be paired with Bakugo of all people for the test of courage? It wasn't that he hated him, it was just that Bakugo was just so loud. They were almost at the halfway point when they saw smoke in the distance. "Hey, Icy Hot, I thought you never used your fire." "I don't," Shudo said. "I didn't light that." "Well then who did?" "Because we're the only ones here with fire quirks and it sure as hell wasn't me." "Just wait." Ashido chuckles nervously. Shudo looked around as he prepared to use his ice. "Be quiet. Don't tell me what to do, Icy Hot. Be quiet. There might be villains." Bakugo scowled. "If this is some trick by those Class B losers, none of us are that stupid." Tetsu growled. Shudo rolled his eyes, at least he wasn't yelling anymore. The boys both crinkled their noses as a smell like rotten eggs started wafting through the forest along with a pink mist. "What the?" Shudo put his hand over his nose as he began to feel lightheaded. "This smoke is poisonous. We have to get out of here." "Hurry please." Kendo comments. "No sit, Sherlock." Bakugo growled, keeping his own mouth and nose plugged. They ran away from the smoke, coming across a Class B student who had passed out on the trail. Shudo hesitated a moment before putting the boy on his back. Heroes never saved him, but maybe he could save this classmate. They continued on, slower than before due to the extra weight. "I didn't hesitate like that." Todoroki comments. "He's not you, not really." Izuku reminds his friend. Because he was no longer covering his face, Shudo got lightheaded much quicker than he had before, and it was only the practice he had working through the pain of his father's training that kept him going. That was probably why it took him longer than it should have to see the black figure kneeling on the path in front of them. Endeavor's grip on his seat tightened. "Who's that?" Bakugo asked. Then he noticed the severed hand. "Which group was in front of us again?" "Tokoyami, I think." Shudo replied softly, trying not to think that the hand might be one of theirs, and Shoji. "So pretty," the figure whispered. "Have to work. But it's so delicious, appealing flesh." The man turned around, revealing a wide mouth held open with hooks. Despite the fact that the man's eyes were covered, Shudo could feel he was looking straight at them. "I have a job to do." All the members who met Moonfish scrunched their noses and shivered at the madman's words. Aizawa watched in horror as his capture weapon went through the villain. As the flame villain melted into goo, he smirked. "I wonder if you can save your students?" "Not bad with the fearmongering." Shigaraki comments. "I thought so." Dobby straightens just a bit. "Mr. Aizawa, help." Eraser looked to see Ida running out of the woods ask fast as he could, panic on his face. "Show me your BLD." A giant villain barreled after him, muscle fibers bulging. Aizawa's eyes widened as he recognized Muscular, and he activated his quirk. What did you do?" Muscular screamed as he deflated, but Aizawa quickly wrapped him in his capture weapon and kneed the villain in the face, knocking him out before blinking. He took in the sight of Muscular's blood-coated fists. "Damn it." Izuku interrupts, standing and starting to pace the front of the room with tears in his eyes. Uraraka stands to go after him. "Deku, what's wrong?" "Koda," he shouts back. "What the FCK is a Koda?" Shigaraki gripes. Izuku rounds on him, furious. "The child that was killed because you were stupid enough to bring an indiscriminate murderer to a kidnapping." He steps closer. "Did you actually think he wouldn't kill Kaken if he got the chance?" Bakugo chimes in. "The cannibal creep didn't even try to capture me." "Thank you, Kaken." Izuku's breathing is heavy as he waits for the villain's reply. Shigaraki stares Izuku down for a moment. "I know better now." With a frustrated growl, Izuku returns to his seat and his friend's comfort. Before turning back to Ida, "Are you all right?" Ida nodded. "The rest of our classmates should be along shortly. I told them to hide because I was the only one able to outrun the villain." "That's good, Ida." Tsu compliments. Aizawa nodded. "Good work. Head inside. Vlad King is already waiting for you with the other students." "I'll be back." He didn't look to see if Ida obeyed as he ran into the woods. If he had heard the flame villain correctly, his students were the targets. He had to save them, or at least get to Mandalay and give them permission to fight back. His heart gripped in panic. It was like the USJ all over again, only this time the villains wouldn't let the students live because they'd already got what they wanted. The students were what they wanted, which was infinitely worse. That night was a nightmare. Aizawa sighs. "For all of us." Vlad agreed. The only students he passed as he ran were Ajuru, Mineta, and Kuda, who promised to go straight to camp. It wasn't long before he reached the clearing where the test of courage was supposed to begin. A lizard-looking villain with a sword made out of other swords was bearing down on Mandalay, and Aizawa managed to pull her out of the way with his capture weapon just in time to prevent her from being cut into ribbons. "Mandalay, are you all right?" "Eraser, have you seen Koda?" Collective flinch. Aizawa felt his stomach sink. "No, I haven't, but I need you to send a message to all the students. Tell them to use their quirks and training, that I'm authorizing them to engage in combat with the villains." Mandalay looked shocked. "Are you sure?" Aizawa nodded. "I'll take the heat. Our students are the targets and they need to be able to defend themselves." "I approve." Netsu agrees. "Ah," a large woman in sunglasses said as she ran at them. "Who squealed?" Toga giggled. "It wasn't a secret, Magna." "Wait." The lizard villain cried. "That's Eraserhead. He's an underground hero, and if Stain were still alive, he would likely judge him a true hero." Aizawa wasn't quite sure how he felt about that, but the important part was that the villains were too busy arguing to attack. "Capitalize on it," Brave suggests. "So what?" "So we must be sure we're abiding by Stain's principle." The lizard villain was cut off by a kick to the head from Mandalay at the same time the other villain was knocked out by Tiger. Dobby snorts. "Pay attention." "Thank you for the help, Eraserhead," Tiger said as Mandalay sent the message to the students. Things were getting kind of rough there. Where are Pixie Bob and Ragdoll? Tiger looked behind him and Aizawa paled as he saw Pixie Bob lying on the ground. Ragdoll hasn't checked in. Aizawa took a deep breath. He couldn't worry about that right now. Get her back to camp. I need to go look for the rest of the students. Tiger nodded as Aizawa ran further into the woods. Please make it in time. Midnight begged. Shudo put up another ice wall to stop the blades, careful to avoid the class boy he'd laid on the ground. Don't just rush into this fight, Bakugo. Whatever, icy hot. We've been given permission to fight, so that's what I'm gonna do. There was a loud smack. Everyone assumes somebody face-bombed, but no one tries to figure out who. Shudo swore as Moonfish dodged his ice wall again and took off into the trees. This guy's quirk is too good at navigating this terrain. This freak looks like a scrawny little sidekick to me. He shifted into a battle stance. Come at me, you bee. You can't use your explosions, Bakugo. You could start a forest fire and kill our classmates. Whatever, icy hot, I'm not an idiot. Debatable. Dobby grumbled. Todoroki doubted that. Right now, Bakugo was acting just like Endeavor. Take down the villain, show his own strength, and don't care who gets hurt in the process. He looked behind him, where the wall of poison gas was now clearly visible. Between Moonfish and the gas, they didn't have anywhere to run. That was the point. Shigaraki states. Bakugo ran at Moonfish with an explosion, breaking some of the blade teeth and causing the villain to cry out in pain. Bakugo smirked. Watch out. Shudo cried as Moonfish's blade teeth flashed, but Bakugo couldn't move out of the way in time. He grits his teeth in pain as he was stabbed through the shoulder. Vifker. He yelled, I'll kill you. Shudo knew he should send an ice wall to protect his classmate, but he could already feel hypothermia setting in. That combined with the gas was making it almost impossible to think straight. I was already using my fire by that point. Todoroki sighs. Flesh, BLD. Moonfish stabbed Bakugo again, but this time he got close enough for the student to grab his face. D. Bakugo screamed and let off a full-force explosion in Moonfish's face. Shudo idly wondered if it was bigger than the one he used during his fight with Uraraka at the sports festival. When the smoke cleared, several trees were smoking and the villain was heavily singed and unconscious. Weak but villain. Bakugo spits a dollop of BLD on the ground before looking at Shudo, who just barely had time to wonder about the look of alarm on his face before he felt himself collapse like a telescope. By the time the nauseating sensation had ended, he was surrounded by blue glass walls and neither Bakugo nor the forest were anywhere to be seen. Bakugo winced. Not puking took some effort after that. Uraraka and Tsu shifted into battle stances as they stared down the villain in front of them. Toga gasped, oh, the memories. What kind of person slashes someone out of nowhere? Tsu said, who do you think you are? The girl pointed at them with a bloody knife. I'm Toga. You two are super cute, Uraraka and Azui. She must know who we are from the sports festival, Uraraka said. That was so creepy. Uraraka comments. It's also something we should get used to, Karo. Tsu agrees. But we don't know anything about her, so we're at a disadvantage, Tsu replied. A normal situation in heroics. Gran gripes. There's not enough BLD, Toga pouted. Normally, I'd CK it straight out of the cut to get it flowing, but there's no time. Don't worry, girls. My fun new toy will start pumping as soon as I stick it in you. I'll get my fill in no time. She looked at them from beneath her lashes. Who's first? Tsu threw Uraraka in the air with her tongue the moment Toga started running. You have to get back to camp. We have permission to defend ourselves, not counterattack. Tsu cried out as Toga slashed her tongue. That's not what I meant. Aizawa groaned. Tsu. Uraraka yelled. Toga stopped for a moment. Tsu? That's so cute. I think I'll call you that too. Tsu backed away in fear. Only my friends call me that. Toga laughed as she pinned Tsu against a tree with a needle. I guess that means we're friends then. You're so cute when you bleed. So not manly. Kirishima mutters. Get away from her. Uraraka yelled. Toga turned and came at her with the knife, but Uraraka used her gunhead martial arts and pinned her to the ground. That was amazing, Ochako. Ochako? You're cute too. Toga stabbed her in the leg and let her machine pull the BLD out. So the bloody chick has some of Uraraka's BLD just tucked away for a rainy day? Shinso asked tensely. Yep, and it gets worse. She replies. Izuku interrupts, she can transform into people whose BLD she drinks. FCK, Uraraka. Aizawa called out her name as he ran into the clearing and activated his quirk. Aizawa-sensei. Tsu cried in relief, you have to help her. Toga jumped away from Uraraka and ran off into the forest. I don't feel like being killed tonight, she giggled. Toodles. Why does she think heroes and their students are going to kill her? Jiro asks. If I'd hazard a guess, I'd say Endeavor. Uraraka. Aizawa knelt beside her on the ground. You're hurt. She shook her head. It's not bad. Good, he nodded, then stood. Make your way back to camp. I've cleared the forest between here and there, so you should be fine if you hurry. Hopefully. All Might comments. Uraraka nodded and the girls were about to leave when they heard rustling in the trees. All three tensed and prepared to fight, but instead of a villain, it was Bakugo who entered the clearing. He was carrying another student on his back and looked halfway between exploding and crying. A hand clasped over his shoulder, but Bakugo couldn't look away. Bakugo? Aizawa said, you were paired with Todoroki for the exercise. Where is he? Bakugo shook his head. They took him. Those Diamond bastards stole Icy Hot. Aizawa's stomach dropped. This was bad. In terms of worst possible scenarios, a kidnapped student was pretty high on the list. Did you see where they took him? Bakugo just shook his head again. It was some a-hole in a yellow coat. He collapsed Icy Hot into a F-King marble and took off through the treetops. I tried to follow them, but... He grimaced. I overused my quirk fighting the one who was trying to kill us, and the BSRD was too fast for me to follow on foot. All of a sudden he screamed and kicked at the base of a tree. I just feel so F-King helpless. We all can relate to that. Keminari sight. Aizawa put a hand on his shoulder. Bakugo, you and the girls get this student back to safety. There's not much else you can do out here anyway if you're suffering from quirk exhaustion. I'll find Todoroki. Bakugo looked like he wanted to argue, but instead, he just scoffed. Fine. They were headed east when I lost track of them. Aizawa nodded and ran east. It was a long shot, but if there was any possibility Todoroki was still here, he had to try and save him. I don't like the odds. Aizawa sighs. Now we just gotta wait for the others to regroup here. This place was supposed to be strong to find because of the wall of flames and poisonous gas. Dobby sighed, but it looks like the gas is gone. Demon right it is. Tetsu cheers. Aizawa hid in the trees, following the flame villain from earlier and a guy named Twice who kept arguing with himself. At one point he'd seen Aoyama cowering behind some bushes, but Aizawa had just put a finger to his lips and gestured for him to leave. Aizawa wanted nothing more than to take both villains down right now, but he held himself back. Bakugo had said the one who stole Todoroki had a yellow coat, and the forest was large enough that Aizawa would never be able to find him on his own. His only hope was to follow Dobby and Twice to the meet-up point and retake Todoroki from the villain who had him. Smart. Shigaraki grinned. Dobby and Twice stopped walking as Toga emerged from the trees. Hey, crazy, did you get the BLD? How many different kinds? Dobby asked. One person. Just one? Twice whined, good job. Weren't you supposed to get 3? That's just the way it went down. I thought those brats were gonna kill me and then a pro showed up. I don't want it assumed that I will kill my opponents. Tokoyami grumbles. I know. Shoji whispers. Whatever, it's fine. Twice said, shouldn't you be full of shame? Both of you shut up. Dobby ordered, you're too loud. Welcome, Mr. Compress. You get the kid? Aizawa moved the moment a yellow-coated figure jumped down from the trees, tripping him with the capture weapon and activating his quirk. A ripping sound filled the clearing and suddenly Mr. Compress's coat was in tatters and Todoroki was kneeling on the ground looking disoriented. Todoroki! Aizawa ran toward him and saw his eyes widen before a massive wall of blue flame blocked his field of vision. So close. Damn it. He was right there. It's been 5 minutes since the signal. A voice declared, let's go. Aizawa activated his quirk and tried to see anyone, but the flames were too bright and Dobby made sure to stay hidden behind them so Aizawa couldn't see him. When the flames finally disappeared, Aizawa readied his capture weapon for the fight and looked around for the villains. But all he saw was an empty forest. No one has much to say somber as they are. In the quiet headcase quickly begins the next chapter. Now playing Viridian the Green Guide progress. Izuku blinked rapidly, half convinced that he was reading the words wrong. A 96% on the entrance exam? How? How was that even possible? There must have been some mistake, right? Izuku was too dumb to be able to ace the entire entrance exam when he hadn't even had time to do it twice. But there was Izuku's name at the top of the email, clear as day, and the letter had arrived in his inbox, so it must be for him. I knew it. Of course he aced it. Nice job. He yelled so that she could hear him from the kitchen. Can you come here? I need to make sure I'm reading this right. He really does doubt himself that much. Ajiru sighs. Mom nearly slid down the hall in her hurry to open his bedroom door. What is it, Izuku? What's wrong? Izuku simply leaned back and pointed to the screen. He held his breath as Mom leaned over to read the email. He didn't know what he was even hoping for. He didn't want to get his hopes up, because there wasn't any way he'd passed, but if Mom read the same thing he did? Oh, Izuku. Mom turned to him with tears in her eyes that were at odds with the brilliant smile on her face. Congratulations. You got in. I knew you could do it. Izuku continued, staring at the screen in shock as Mom sank to her knees and hugged him. Two got in. I got in. Yeah. You did it. Congratulations. No more bullies. Mom chuckled as he hugged him even tighter. You did. This is going to be so good for you, Izuku. I'll call Aldera first thing in the morning and do the paperwork. This calls for a celebration. Do you want to go out? Izuku shook his head and held up his cast. I don't want to risk running into anyone. A wince, that's fair. Koda comments. Mom's eyes shone in understanding. How about some ice cream? Then I can go pick some up while you register for your classes. Izuku nodded and Mom smiled and ruffled his hair before she left. Izuku turned back to the email and clicked on the link to sign up for classes. The first step was to make sure he was registered for all the required classes, such as science, math, and literature. Then he had to take one foreign language class, so he ended up registering for English since that was what the school recommended. The problem was that he also had to take 3 elective classes, but Izuku had never really had any hobbies outside of being a hero, which obviously wasn't going to happen. He frowned as he scrolled through his options. Art might be fine. It would help make his notebooks more detailed if nothing else, so he added that class before he could start to doubt himself. But that still left 2 classes. Little Green Bean doing art. Midnight squealed. He was most of the way down the list of electives by the time another class caught his eye. Quirk theory. That could be interesting. Analyzing quirks was one of his favorite parts of watching hero fights, and Eraserhead had mentioned that analyzing villains' quirks would help him fight better, so it wouldn't hurt to learn more about them. But that still left one final elective. He should probably choose something to do with a hobby, but Izuku really didn't have any hobbies outside of being a vigilante, and somehow he didn't think that his new school would let him count that as an elective. I would hope not. Aizawa snarks. Thinking of his vigilantism made Izuku restless. It had been almost a week and a half since he'd gone out and he was really starting to miss it. His body had gotten used to waking up in the middle of the night, so he was spending a few hours every night just staring at the ceiling and reminding himself that Mom would never forgive him if he somehow managed to re-break his arm, and that if he did, then he'd have to explain how he'd broken it again, and that would just make her worry too much. At least he's resting? Uraraka tries. Yes, that is preferable. Ida assures. His only consolation about the whole thing was that he knew that none of the heroes were missing him. In fact, they were probably just grateful that he was staying out of the way, and he knew he was being selfish for wanting to feel useful again, but he just wished there was some way he could still help while he was healing. It would be amazing if he had a quirk that let him see the streets remotely, then he could just call the heroes and send them to where they were needed. It didn't even have to be a quirk. If he even had some sort of drone he could fly without being suspicious, or even just some sort of camera, I'd suggest hacking like our friend Cheat Code. Nezu remarks. I think Shadows mentioned it too. Aizawa adds. Let's not forget Mastermind's program. Tsukachi growls. Izuku sat straight up. Security cameras. Why hadn't he thought of that before? They were all over the city, and sure, they didn't cover every alleyway, but they had to be better than nothing. It was probably completely useless since there was no way that a Deku like him would be able to become good enough at hacking to be able to access the city's security cameras without getting caught, but Well, he needed another elective anyway, and programming would be a good skill for the future. It's a start. Izuku sighs. He found a class on programming basics and signed up just as Mom arrived with the ice cream. He knew he shouldn't get his hopes up, it would only hurt that much more when everything went wrong again. And it's sad again. Kaminari groans. Shoyuta was struggling to focus on his investigation. Really, he hadn't known Viridian for that long, so why should he be this affected by the fact that he disappeared? He just disappeared. Shoyuta didn't have any evidence to the contrary, and it was completely illogical to assume the worst possible outcome. But he also didn't want to keep his hopes up, only for the kid to have been dead the whole time, just like Aizawa, Yamada, and Kayama flinch. Well, he should be getting back to work. There had been more and more cases of instant villains in the last few weeks, and the last time this had happened, it had been followed by the next-level villains. It was almost as though whoever was behind the villain factory was gauging the potential for villains the same way he did for heroes. This led to the next major mystery. Before his disappearance, Hamasaki had said something about the symbol of evil. The phrase tickled at the back of Shuta's brain, like he'd read it somewhere before, but hadn't paid any attention to it, but try as he might, he just couldn't remember the significance of the epitaph. It seemed to have some significance to Tsukachi, but when Shoyuta had pressed him for answers, he'd simply said that it wasn't important. He'd said that it couldn't be the man he thought it was because that one was already dead and had been for years. Shoyuta just hoped he was imagining the way that Tsukachi had gone pale during the conversation. That's going to be an uncomfortable conversation. Tsukachi sighs. It was frustrating. The biggest lead they'd ever gotten about the villain factory, and it was a dead end. So what next? It just wasn't practical to put every single trigger user in protective custody in case the factory started abducting again, so they were on the back foot until the villains made another move. If only they knew what kinds of quirks appealed to the villain factory. Shoyuta knew that it wasn't necessarily strong quirks, because they had a lot of ways to strengthen them artificially, but there didn't seem to be any common denominator between the victims who got abducted and those that didn't. Random is so much scarier than a pattern. Ashido shivers. If only the kid were still. Of course, even if he was alive, it wouldn't be fair to bring him into such a dangerous investigation. Even if he was a vigilante, he was still a semi-suicidal teenager who wasn't prepared to deal with the danger that came from investigations like this. But still, the kid had a talent for quirk analysis. He hadn't been able to spend a lot of time with the notebook, but from what he'd read, he had a sneaking suspicion that if anyone could figure out how the villain factory was picking their victims, it was Viridian. Izuku blushes as his friends lay on the agreements. If Katsuki didn't know he was the best, he might be tempted to think he was an idiot. Seriously, how hadn't he noticed how messed up Aldra was? Were their teachers secretly villains or something? Because that was kinda the only explanation Katsuki could think of that would explain how they willfully ignored kids getting beat up right in front of them. Depends on the world. Headcase comments. What does that mean? Bakugo asks gruffly. Headcase turns to him and, loud enough for everyone to hear, replies there are worlds where Aldra is, straight up, run by a quirk supremacist cult. After a moment of silence, Izuku states that would make too much sense. And that wasn't even getting into the verbal bullying that happened right in the middle of class. The teachers didn't ignore that, but Katsuki thought ignoring it would be preferable to what they were doing. They seemed to be actively creating opportunities for the students to make fun of the less popular students, and often joined in the mockery by publicly shaming students for tiny offenses that wouldn't even get Katsuki a sideways glance. Now that did happen to me. Izuku huffs. I wonder if Nedzu will let us demolish the school when he's done with the people. Shinso remarks. I suspect he will. Ida chops. It was messed up. But what was even more messed up was that Katsuki didn't know how to stop it. He was supposed to be the best, but he wasn't about to pretend that he had any sort of moral authority here. He'd bullied Deku and all those other extras for years, so he couldn't just turn around and tell others to stop. That does sound difficult. Hawks considers. Why had he even stopped? It had taken Deku literally saving his life to even get him to lay off the nerd, not that he'd ever forgive Deku for that, but still, he'd f'd up way too badly to say anything now. Close but no cigar. Mirko snarked. The best that he could do was stop acting like a villain. He'd thought it was pretty clever to volunteer at that villain rehabilitation group. Volunteering and sit always looked good on hero school applications, and maybe he'd even be able to learn something or some sit without jeopardizing his clean record. Not that he deserved a clean record, but he needed to be a hero. He wasn't about to let his idiot teachers ruin his chances at being the #1 hero just because they couldn't be bothered to do their F-King jobs. And you will be. Kirishima cheered. That amplifier beach had sent him home with some paperwork to do, but he'd be attending the next meeting. He'd just have to deal with being in the same room with villains without exploding them on sight. Katsuki glanced over at his teacher, who was correcting essays while fingers scratched at that one kid who could make bubbles. At least he was getting some practice. It's slow going, but you're getting better. Shiro grins. In one world. Kaminari teases. Whatever. Bakugo shoves them all away. Easy Blasty, we're proud of you. Ashido hugs the blonde. You know it. Kirishima cheers. Whatever. Bakugo replies a little quieter. Now playing cheat code support strategist noise, you rely on your quirk too much. Izuku almost felt bad saying it, especially since Shinso was taking time out of his day to talk to them during lunch. His quirk was amazing, so, of course, he relied on it, and it was part of him, so Izuku couldn't discount that, but, no, yeah, Aizawa said pretty much the same. Shinso groaned. Mei piped up, shoveling a spoonful of rice into her mouth. But don't feel bad. Most heroes do, but that's why you have us. Shinso looked at them skeptically, and how am I supposed to be a hero without my quirk? That is not what they said. Uraraka huffs. Izuku waved his hands frantically in front of him. Not without your quirk. We would never tell you to hold yourself back like that. It's just that. What's it? It's the activation requirements. Mei interrupted. You're pretty good at making people respond to you, but eventually you're going to come across someone who has more self-control than you have sass. Unless they start monologuing. Toga snickers. Shut up. Shigaraki and Dobby snap in unison. Izuku couldn't hold back a huff of shocked laughter. What she said. The fact is that once people know about your quirk, you have a huge handicap. It would be like if a villain immediately took Snipe's gun at the beginning of a fight. He would still have his quirk, but he wouldn't be able to use it. The only difference here is that Snipe can use his quirk to protect his gun, you can't. Mei thought for a moment. He also carries an extra gun. Aizawa-kun, let's give extra credit Kun a gun. Not without proper training, Snipe corrects. Shinso looked at them in shock and a bit of fear, so Izuku figured he wasn't quite ready for that. Despite the amazing potential the idea had, maybe let's start with something smaller, like how we can prevent villains from finding out about his quirk. Nice thought. Shinso pointed at them with his chopsticks. But that's the thing about my quirk. If you fall for it once, you know how it works. Maybe. Izuku flipped through his notebook until he found a page that he'd used to scribble ideas. How long does your connection last? Shinso shrugged, no idea. I've never been allowed to control someone for more than a few minutes. That experiment with you the other day was as long as I've ever gone. That's not what I. Izuku had to take a second to gather his thoughts. I mean, that's good to know, but how long can you wait between getting a response and taking control? Izuku grins. Shinso looked surprised, then thoughtful. I don't know. I always thought it was best to just take control as soon as I can, so I've never actually tried to wait or anything. Izuku grinned and flipped to a new page in his notebook. Perfect. So, how do you know the connection has been formed? Do you have to try to brainwash them, or can you just feel it? I can feel it, Shinso said quietly. It's like the person is inside my brain. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have told you that. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. Stop that. Uraraka scolded. Mei responded by slapping Shinso over the head. Stop that. Good experiments are uncomfy. You never learn anything interesting just by sitting on your butt. So embrace the awkward. Izuku laughed, then saw the shocked expression on Shinso's face and laughed even harder. I didn't know you could give inspirational speeches, Mei-chan. Mei grins. I'm a woman of many talents. Mei said cryptically. You'll never discover them all. And on that terrifying note, Shinso drawled. Do you want to start? Of course. Izuku responded with a grin. Do you have the connection now? Shinso nodded with a concentrated look on his face but didn't respond. Izuku nodded. It must take a fair amount of focus to keep the connection without completing the brainwash. Mei, start the timer. Already on it, Izuku-an. Mei pressed a few buttons on her phone and the experiment officially began. So, Izuku-an, how are the hero students doing? Any opportunities for me to make super awesome babies? Hundreds. Mei cheers. They're doing well. Izuku smiled and grabbed one of the many notebooks he'd created for the project. Each student had their own notebook dedicated to their quirks and ideas, and while some were still completely empty, others were already half full. The notebook Izuku happened to grab was for one of the Class 1B students with a really cool copy quirk. Take this guy, Monoma, for example. He can copy any quirk for 5 minutes, but I think there might be a way for him to create, well, basically a stockpile of quirks. If he has to touch a person's whole body, then that won't work, but if it works with any DNA, then he can incorporate different quirks into his costume and always have them on hand when he needs them. Mei grinned. I like the way you think, Izuku-an. Well, that's flattering. Monoma mumbles, a little embarrassed. 1A isn't as bad as you thought? Kendo smiles smugly. Shut up. Nito pouts. Suddenly, Izuku's brain went foggy as the increasingly familiar feeling of Shinso's quirk washed over him. It only lasted a few seconds before Shinso released his control. I am so sorry. Shinso was a little out of breath and looked pale and sweaty. I held on for as long as I could, but why is that so difficult? Because your quirk wants action. Izuku said. Instinctively, people want to either do something or not. No one likes being caught in an in-between place. But this is great. You don't have to take control immediately, which gives you a few minutes to disguise your real activation requirements. How long did he last? My real requirements? Shinso asks. You'll see. Izuku insists. 2 minutes, 8 seconds. Mei declared. I'd prefer if it were a little longer, but we can train for that. Izuku agreed. Ideally, we could get him up to 5 minutes between response and control before the sports festival, but we'll of course have to see how things work and… Rebecca. Shinso interrupted. What do you mean by my real activation requirements? And shouldn't I be focused on keeping control of people longer or controlling more people or giving more advanced orders or something? What's the point of training to wait before taking control, which isn't easy by the way, when as a hero, I should be trying to resolve situations as quickly as possible. Listen to the problem child. Aizawa suggests. Izuku looked at Mei, who shrugged. He thought they'd explained everything pretty well. Shinso sighed. How about you two start again at the beginning, but this time pretend that you're talking to someone who doesn't have a single clue you're trying to say. Because I don't. I like the kid's sass. Mirko snorted. Izuku glanced at Mei again before taking a deep breath to try to organize his thoughts. Okay. So, the main problem with your quirk is that it's more effective if your opponent doesn't know what it is, right? That's the basic idea. Yeah. Shinso rolled his eyes. But what does that have to do with the time between their response and my control? Because from where I'm sitting, it seemed like a non sequitur. It's a red herring. Mei grinned. I see. Tsemetos hums. Shinso didn't look any less confused and raised an eyebrow at Izuku after apparently giving up getting anything close to a normal answer from Mei. It's about distracting whoever you're fighting with and burying the truth inside a bunch of useless information. Izuku explained. For example, sometimes in books, something important will be thrown out, but the readers won't realize it, because the man with the scar who turns out to be the villain was mentioned right alongside a woman with a large hat who was completely unimportant. If you take control immediately after you get an answer, Mei fl ked Shinso on the forehead, then it's like putting a big neon sign above your head explaining how your quirk works. Obviously. Jiro huffs. Thanks. Shinso said dryly. But, Izuku said quickly, if you wait a few minutes between establishing the connection and giving the order, and use those minutes to do things like make direct eye contact, establish physical contact, or, I don't know, jump up and down 3 times while singing nursery rhymes, then no one will know exactly which of those things established the connection. Mei finished. Sounds like fun. Shinso drawls. I don't sing. Shinso deadpanned, but Izuku could see the faintest trace of a smile in his eyes, and it looked like he finally understood what they were going for. Okay, so when do I start? Well, technically you started today, Izuku said cheekily. But we'll have a schedule for you by tomorrow if you come by after classes. Do you have anyone at home that you can practice your quirk with? Shinso's expression immediately closed off. Interesting, no. More a-holes like in shadows, I bet. Mei growls. That's all right, Izuku said, forcing a layer of cheeriness past his curiosity and, surprisingly, a little bit of anger on Shinso's behalf. Then you'll just have to practice with us. I don't want you to do any more today, since this exercise is still so new and it's the first time that your brain has had to do it, so we should let it rest. But starting tomorrow, you should start practicing that waiting exercise we just did 2 or 3 times a day. For the sports festival, you also need to be able to complete distracting tasks before you officially activate your quirk, so we should focus on getting you to the point where you don't even have to think about it and have full autonomy on when you activate your connection. You're already designing a training regimen, aren't you? Shinso asks. Of course. Izuku chirps, earning an eye roll. Shinso looked a little pale, but Izuku noticed that he also looked determined, just like himself when he used to say he'd be a hero despite his quirklessness. It didn't work out for him, but if he could still help people like Shinso who deserve to be heroes, then that was more than enough. Shinso would overcome every obstacle put in his path and save so many people, and Izuku would have a hand in that. It was almost even better than his own old dream. And now I'm sad again. Keminari sight. Perfect. Mei broke the tension by grabbing Shinso by the arm and dragging him back out into the main lab. Now that Aizakuan's had a chance to do his thing, it's my turn. I'm so excited. I have so many awesome babies for you to try. Babies? Shinso looked nervous and a little shocked. But why? Izuku felt a little bad, but he couldn't help laughing when he realized that he had never actually explained some of Mei's more exciting eccentricities to Shinso. Oh well, better late than never, he supposed. She means her inventions. Izuku managed to gasp between his chuckles. Mei-chan calls her inventions her babies because she cares about them so much. I made them, Izukin. Mei cried indignantly. If you poured your heart and soul into something, you'd call them your babies too. I do pour my heart and soul into something. Izuku grinned cheekily. I call them my notebooks. Snort, huh? I mean fair. So, we're just going to be looking at inventions, Shinso confirmed, not experimenting with human children? The only human children we'll be experimenting on are ourselves. Mei said gleefully, grabbing a large cardboard box from her workstation. Extra credit, Kun. Grab that box under the table. Shinso shrugged and went to pick up the box, only to stumble when the weight was more than he expected. What's in this thing, rocks? Solid metal tools and gear. Mei corrects. So basically the same. Shinso grinned cheekily. Mei backhanded his shoulder with her tongue out at him. Oh hush, it's not that heavy. Mei dismissed. Izukin, grab the other one. Izuku shrugged and ignored the way that Shinso looked at him knowingly as he tried to pick up the box, only to grunt and fall backward onto his butt. Mei-chan, seriously? How strong are you? It's not my fault you boys are weak. Mei shrugged. Come on, we need to steal one of the soundproof test rooms. Izuku stared after her in shock as she walked away and for the first time noticed how much muscle tone she actually had. She'd handled that box like it was nothing, even though both he and Shinso had struggled. He supposed it made sense with how much heavy material she had to work with while inventing, but it was still really impressive. Muscles. Minetta trolet. W. Mei glanced at the G in disgust. Are you just gonna keep staring at her but all day? Kahaku asked dryly, looking up from her own invention, or are you actually gonna help her? Izuku sputtered and turned bright red. I wasn't. I didn't. You're too easy to fluster, Midoriya, Karo. Tsu teased. I know. Izuku whines. Deciding that it was best to just cut his losses, Izuku grabbed the box and hefted it as best he could before leaving his snickering classmates behind and following Mei and Shinso. Mei was already taking things out of her box while Shinso was catching his breath and leaning against the wall. Izuku set his box down heavily next to the other two on the table and started shaking out his arms. Been there. I can feel the strain just watching. Shinso looked at Mei. Is she actually human? Or is she just some robot that killed its creator and started updating itself while pretending to be human? Mei grinned. But no, Mei-chan. Izuku said patiently. You can't make yourself into a cyborg. Headcase coughs. Mei deflated, then brightened and was about to say something, but Izuku interrupted her before she could say what he knew she was going to say. You can't make Shinso into a cyborg either. Headcase waves off any concern. Mei pouted. It'd be a great way to get around that stupid one-supportitemanly rule that the gene students have. And how is he gonna beat the hero course if he can't even lift a box? Shinso straightened up. I lifted it. I did better than Midoriya anyway. Aizawa is an analyst. Mei-chan said. He can afford to be a weakling. Izuku pouts. Mei just chuckles at him. Thanks. Izuku deadpanned, then frowned thoughtfully. But in all seriousness, it would probably be a good idea for you to take up some sort of physical training, Shinso. Your quirk will probably keep you out of most fights, but there are always times that a hero has to rely on their body more than their quirk. Take Eraserhead, for example. He's such a great hero because of his martial arts training, not just his ability to cancel quirks. Mike grins at Eraser with a teasing edge. Aizawa glares at him, not one word. You like Eraserhead? Shinso asked. I've never met someone else who liked him. Most people I talked to before UA just thought I was making him up. Midnight Snickers sounds about right. Oh, he's one of my favorites. Izuku grinned. Did you hear he's one of the teachers here? Have you seen him yet? No, I've been looking everywhere, hoping to catch a glimpse of him in the halls, but I haven't had any luck. Shinso frowned. I guess he's just that good at stealth, huh? He is UA's resident cryptid. Uraraka chirps. I mean, you kinda have to be to avoid the media as a professional hero. Izuku said. What do you think? Experiments now, fanboying later. Mei said, popping between them with a large metal mask in one hand and 3 pairs of protective earmuffs in the other. Put these on. Oh, right, training. Shinso chuckles. Izuku put one of the earmuffs around his neck as Mei helped Shinso into the mask. If you want, we could probably use one of the school's gyms to work out and try to gain some strength before the sports festival. Shinso raised an eyebrow at him. We? Izuku shrugged and stretched out his arms. I sit in front of a screen all day. I've been getting sore. Everywhere online says that adding some physical activity to my schedule will help with that. Plus, I can't just call Mei-chan every time I need to move something heavy. I'm always happy to help. Mei teases. I remind you I can carry All Might without my quirk. Izuku claps back. I'm sure she'd be more than happy to open all the jars for you. Shinso smirked. Nope, too busy. Mei said. Now extra credit Kun, stand on the other side of that plexiglass and yell. What was that about always being happy to help? Uraraka elbowed Mei lightly. Within reason. Mei defends. Shinso's eyes widened. Yell? Mei grinned and nodded. We need a baseline for volume. Shinso walked across the room and waited until both Mei and Izuku had put on their earmuffs before taking a deep breath and yelling as loudly as he could, shaking the room. Mei took a few notes, looking at an instrument in her hands that Izuku had no idea what it was or how to read it, but assumed it told her something about the decibels or volume or whatever. Who would have thought one of the quiet ones could be so loud? Kaminari chutkles. Isn't that, like, common in voice quirks? Ashido remarks. A question for Midoriya. Siro suggests. Later. Kirishima hushes them. She pulled one side of her earmuffs away from her, prompting Izuku and Shinso to do the same. Okay, extra credit Kun, now try to brainwash Aizawa. Shinso nodded and turned to Izuku. What's your favorite food? Katsudon. It's a toss-up between moms and kakins though. Izuku adds. Izuku waited for the familiar feeling of Shinso's quirk to wash over him, but instead, after a few seconds, Shinso just shook his head. I can't make the connection. Is this mask electronically transmitting my voice? Mei said. Is that a problem? It must be a problem with quirk transmission. Izuku said. Whatever establishes the connection is carried on the voice itself, so having a speaker probably blocks that part. Is that right? Something we can work around. Mei mumbles. When Shinso nodded, Mei took another prototype from one of the boxes and handed it to Shinso. Okay. Mask Baby 2.0. This should magnify your voice without the need for a speaker. And you just have this? Shinso asked. We knew that might be a risk. Izuku responded. And Mei enjoyed the challenge. I always do. Mei cheers. It's not as advanced as my other babies. Mei said. But for now, it should amplify your voice and I can modify it later to act as a voice changer. Now go yell. Shinso walked back behind the plexiglass and screamed, making Izuku wince, even with his earmuffs. Mei wrote something down, then gestured for him to do it again. When he finished, Izuku felt like his ears were still ringing. Or wait, was that something else? Oh right, the whole reporter invasion. Jiro rolls her eyes. He held up a hand to signal Shinso to stop and took off his earmuffs. Do you guys hear anything? I'm wearing earmuffs in a soundproof room. Shinso deadpanned. The only thing I can hear is my own thoughts. A dangerous state of being. Tokoyami comments. Fumi. Dark Shadow cries. Izuku frowned but listened closer, and sure enough, he could still hear something coming from outside. Do you hear that, Mei-chan? Mei nodded. It sounds like alarms. The three of them hurried to the door and opened it, only to be blasted with the sound of blaring alarms and flashing lights. The classroom was already empty, and their classmates were nowhere to be found. They left us behind. Mei chuckles. They must have assumed we heard the alarm. Mei said. Or they tried knocking on the door and we didn't hear them. Did we cause the alarm to go off? Izuku was panicking. I didn't think we were being that loud, but if something went wrong and sound can cause damage, look at present mic. Are we going to get in trouble? What if they never let us near a test room again? What if they expel? Whoa there. Mike chuckles. They're not going to be mad at us for setting off an alarm, Izuku-en. Mei groaned. And I don't think this was us anyway. It would have taken at least twice as much noise to trigger the auditory attack defense system. Should we leave? Shinso asked. I don't want to be here if that's a fire alarm. But my babies, Mei said. I can't just leave them. Whatever Izuku was about to say was cut off by the alarms going silent. Or not. The PA system crackled to life and Nedzu's cheery voice filtered through the speakers. Hello students, the threat has been handled. Please calmly return to class. Alright, Mei said, pushing both boys back into the soundproof room. Back to testing. Izuku thought it was odd that there was an alarm in the middle of the day, and what had Nedzu meant by threat? He meant to look into it later, he really did, but then Mei started another round of experiments, and he completely forgot. He's going to regret that. Izuku mentions. He'll probably blame himself. Todoroki suggests. Another USJ event. Uraraka reminds tensely. Let's hope it's better than the last one, Karo. Tsu intones. Now playing Shadows the horror movie Heroes Education. Kyoka double-checked her phone again and sure enough, this seemingly abandoned apartment building was exactly where her Maps app was leading her. She huffed in frustrated disappointment. It had been strong enough to find anything on some old hero named Gran Torino, and it had been even harder to find a current address. The internet had been pretty much a total bust, and she'd ended up just calling Recovery Girl and asking if she knew anything. That, of course, had led to an awkward conversation about how no, All Might hadn't told her and yes, she was planning on reaching out anyway, but thankfully instead of being angry at her for eavesdropping, Recovery Girl had just laughed and promised not to give away the surprise. It wasn't supposed to be a surprise, not really. Kyoka just needed some advice beyond, get stronger and punch things and was hoping this Gran Torino dude would be able to help. Well, this will be a disaster. Izuku comments. Disaster bad or disaster funny? Jiro asks. Izuku huffs a laugh both. Well, the address Recovery Girl had given her was obviously wrong. There was no way that anyone could actually live here, but it left a sour taste in her mouth to just turn around and leave after she'd come all this way. She sighed and trudged up the steps. She'd knock and wait a few minutes, but when nobody answered she was just going home. Yeah, no, that's where he lives. Izuku chutzkles. Her knocks echoed through the house, but after a moment, Kyoka heard shuffling from inside. There was actually someone in there. She stuck her hand in her pocket and wrapped it around her pepper spray just to be safe, even though she really shouldn't be as trigger-happy as she was last time, but just in case it wasn't Gran Torino who opened the door. Maybe she should have asked All Might to come with her and introduce them. No, please. All Might whispered. The door opened and she had to look down to see the owner of the house because he was so old that he'd shrunk just like Recovery Girl had. He wasn't a lot to look at, Just a standard old man with a stubbly beard and a big flannel shirt who probably ate too many TV dinners, but he glared up at her while holding his cane in a way that made it very clear that she was one wrong move away from losing her kneecaps. Who are you? Are you selling cookies? She's not wrong about the kneecaps. Gran confirms. Kyoka blinked. What? Shame. The man let out a disgruntled noise. So why are you here then? Well, I'd like to ask you a few questions, actually. Kyoka said. Assuming you're actually the guy I'm looking for. But yeah. He gave her an appraising look. And who is that? Gran Torino. Kyoka smiled when his eyes widened. That's you, right? Recovery girl told me I was looking for a crotchety old man. Oi. Gran griped humorously. Come now, did you expect me to lie to the dearie? Chio remarks. Gran Torino guffawed loudly. Oh, is that what she told you? Well, it takes one to know one, that's for sure. And why would you be looking for a crotchety old man like me? I was hoping you'd be able to offer some more insight about a secret All Might told me. Kyoka said cryptically. What do you know about One for All? A lot more than the big lug apparently. Gran scoffs. Izuku and Hitoshi let the psychological thriller they were watching play in the background as they watched clips of last year's sports festival on Izuku's laptop. They each had notebooks open right next to them with the name of the student they were currently analyzing, which at the moment was a second year named Tamaki Amajiki. No. Amajiki whines. I'm sure it won't be too bad. Hadu cheers. You should have more faith in yourself. Mirio comforts. His quirk is so interesting. Izuku gushed. Depending on the combination, he could probably imitate almost any quirk. Does it work on inorganic materials? Like, if he ate a piece of a un, could he float? Actually, that wouldn't really work, but maybe if he inhaled helium. Amajiki buries his head in his hands. I think it's safe to assume that most of what he manifests is actually food. Hitoshi pointed out. It's weird finding somebody so shy in the hero course though. He'll most likely try to stick to a supporting role, but if we can force him into the spotlight, his anxiety is bound to give us the advantage, especially if we can isolate him from those two other kids he always sits with at the end of his fights. They're his support system, so remove them. Okay, you might have a tough time with them. A dou conselhos. But he'll rise to the occasion. Mirio assures. Or fail miserably. Tamaki sighs. Izuku grinned, and he just might crumble. Controlling what he eats is a little harder, especially since we obviously don't want to just starve him or anything, and will only become relevant if it ends up being beneficial to capture him, but I can do some research into some plants or things that won't give him any useful traits. Maybe corn? It doesn't have vines, so it'll be harder to weaponize. May I say this strategy is rather brutal? Ida remarks. Could be worse. Todoroki reminds with the smallest growl to his voice glancing at his brother. Getting hit with corn cobs is still gonna hurt. Hitoshi pointed out. But yeah, not really as scary as a blackberry bush wrapping around you or, like, a bull's horns or something. Yeah. Izuku wrote himself a note for later. I think I've got an okay idea of his quirk now. What about you? Do you have a clear picture of his personality? Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. I've been picking apart people's brains since I was 4, Izuku. You have to know what makes a person tick to make them talk. Izuku grinned and flipped to the next page. Okay then, who's next? How about Mirio Togata? Hitoshi shrugged. Sounds good to me. See, it's not just you. Mirio cheers. Not helping. Amajiki groans. Gran Torino grabbed Kyoka by the arm and dragged her inside, slamming the door behind her. What did you just say? He was a lot faster than she was expecting and a lot stronger too. Kyoka winced and rubbed at her arm as soon as he let her go. I said I wanted to know more about One for All. Gran Torino just glared at her suspiciously. And how do you even know about it? Didn't I already tell him? Jiro asks quietly. The elderly often experience hearing loss. Yamamo whispers back. All Might told me. Kyoka steadily returned his glare. He said he wants me to inherit it, but at the same time, I know there's something he's not telling me. If I'm going to let somebody else give me a quirk, I'd like to know what I'm getting into. Izuku chirps with an obviously false smile. Gran Torino frowned and pulled out his phone, but he was no longer staring daggers at her, so that was an improvement. He still gave her a suspicious glance as he held the phone up to his ear, though. Kyoka's eyes widened when All Might answered the phone. Gran Torino? What? To what do I owe the pleasure? I wasn't expecting a call from you today. You can hear the fear. Kaminari shivers. I have a girl here who says she's your successor. Gran Torino said. Purple hair, more attitude than Nana had at your age, sound familiar? If she's your successor, why the hell aren't you here with her? Jiro heard a hacking cough on the other end of the phone and grimaced as she realized All Might was spitting up BLD again. That was her bad. I didn't actually tell him I was coming. I overheard him talking about you with some guy named Tsukachi and just thought you might be able to help me. Gran Torino blinked at her for a moment as All Might spluttered excuses before he took a deep breath and yelled into the phone. That's even worse, you nincompoop. Were you really so sparse on the details that this girl had to go out of her way to find somebody to give her some answers? You know what? She seems like a nice girl and I'm glad you found somebody with a LCK of sense at least, so I'll help you out and answer her questions, okay? But you owe me a full box of taiyaki, got it? You still owe me too. Gran reminds. Of course. All Might quickly agrees. Yes, sir. All Might spluttered. Of course. Thank you. Gran Torino hung up the phone as Jiro looked at him in shock. All right, kid, now what's your name? Kyoka Jiro. Kyoka said. Sir? Gran Torino just rolled his eyes. Just call me Gran. All Might only bothers with that sir stuff because I had to beat some sense into him when he was younger. Now what all did that All-American Peak CK tell you about One for All? All-American Peak CK? Ashido cackled. Various types of laughter fill the room as Gran grins proudly. Well, he told me that it's a quirk that gets passed down and that it'll make me stronger. Jiro started. But it's not really the quirk itself that I have questions about. My problem is more, like, about the training? All Might told me that if I don't have enough muscle mass when I accept it, it'll blow my arms off, which we obviously don't want to have happen, right? But, like, I get that it's a lot of power, but muscle mass can't be the only way to HRNSS it. Muscle takes a lot of time to build and showing up to the entrance exam with a new quirk that I've never used before just sounds like a recipe for disaster to me. It is. Izuku confirms with feeling. Gran stared at her with an unreadable expression for a long moment before pulling out his phone again. You told her she couldn't receive it until when? You're lucky that kid is resilient. Gran growls at Yagi. Yes, I'm realizing that. All Might defends with his hands up in defeat. At least the man is learning. Recovery Girl mentions. And it seems like he'll have plenty of time to learn more. Nedzuchutsklis. Now settle down, it's starting. Now playing Deku? I think he's some pro. You reap what you sow. When Izuku woke up in Recovery Girl's office, Aizawa was standing over him with an expression that was an odd mix of relieved, afraid, and absolutely pissed. Give me one good reason why I shouldn't expel him right now. This should be good. Aizawa groans. Izuku bit his lip. This was what he was worried about since he'd learned that Aizawa had expelled an entire class of first-year students for being just like Katsuki, but he just couldn't expel him. His entire life, there were only two things that Izuku had known with absolute certainty, and those were that all men were not created equal and that Katsuki Bakugo would be an amazing hero. Izuku just couldn't bring himself to be the reason that one of those truths came crashing down around his ears. He opened his mouth to say so, taking a deep breath before closing it again. Think this through, problem child. Aizawa insists. Would Katsuki be an amazing hero? Truly? Izuku paused, remembering all the times Katsuki had put him in his place simply because he had been born weaker. Was that someone who would be able to protect the weak, like a hero was supposed to do? Or was that someone who just wanted a license to beat people up? What about all the teachers who had just watched, praising Katsuki's quirk and pushing all the blame on Izuku for causing trouble? What had they done to make sure Katsuki would be a great hero, besides assuring him that he was better than everyone else? Wasn't it their responsibility to guide him, not Izuku's? Indeed. Nezu admits. Because it's not his fault. Aizawa let out an angry exhale, running his fingers through his hair. It's not yours either, problem child. Izuku looked up at him. I know. Progress. He's learning. That threw Aizawa for a loop. He looked at Izuku with wide eyes for a long moment before sitting next to him on the bed. Then why, after everything he's done to you, why does he deserve a place at UA? Izuku took a deep breath, speaking slowly as he tried to untangle what he was thinking. It's not his fault that he is the way he is. Did you know that the teachers knew he was beating me up? They never told anyone, especially my mom, even though everyone knew. Katsuki still has a spotless record because it was easier to blame me and they didn't want to ruin their chances of being associated with such an amazing hero. No one has ever told him that what he's doing is wrong. They've taught him that it's his right as the strongest to prey on the weak and that there are people in this world that no one should care about. Izuku looked at Aizawa. You shouldn't expel him because he's never truly had the chance to succeed. He's still young and it's not too late. If someone tries, maybe Katsuki can still be a great hero. But Kaminari whispers. He isn't doing it alone either. Ashido grins, practically body-slamming Bakugo. Get off me. Bakugo barks at her. Just accept it. Shiro smiles broadly. We're with you, bro. Kirishima chuckles. Bakugo just groans. Aizawa scowled and clenched his fists a few times. Fine, he said, but I'm making him go to mandatory anger management therapy. He stood and headed toward the door to talk to Nezu, but Izuku grabbed his hand. Eraser? Looked up at Aizawa with a small smile. Thank you. Aizawa rolled his eyes and ruffled Izuku's hair. Whatever, problem child. How soft, Midnight teased. Shut up. Aizawa scowled. He had his hand on the door when Izuku realized one last thing. Eraser, wait. Aizawa looked at him with one eyebrow raised. Don't tell him that I didn't want him to be expelled. He frowned. It won't go over well. Aizawa nodded and opened the door, heading down the hall. Izuku sighed and ran his fingers through his hair again. Hopefully he'd made the right decision. Only time will tell. Shoji sighs. Bakugo, would you and your parents follow me, please? Aizawa led the three into Nezu's office where the principal was already waiting. He'd already talked to him about what Deku had said and they'd come up with a plan. As Deku's friend, Aizawa would really rather expel the brat, but as a teacher, he had to admit it made a grudging sort of sense. It wouldn't be rational to expel Bakugo when this kind of behavior had been ignored and even encouraged in the past if Deku was to be believed. We are teachers. My comforts. If the brat messed up, however, he'd kick him to the curb. Merciless. Shigaraki smirks. Bakugo glared at everything in the office as if it had personally offended him, which maybe, from his perspective, it had. He certainly seemed to think that Deku was trying to offend him, even when the kid had done nothing wrong. His mother was just as loud as he was, just less angry, while Aizawa would almost forget his father was there if he didn't physically take up space. It was definitely an interesting family dynamic and it made Aizawa wonder if the schools were entirely responsible for what Bakugo had become. Again, depends on the world. Headcase comments. He stood silently in the corner watching as Nezu smiled pleasantly at the family. Thank you so much for coming in. We apologize again for pulling you away from work, but this issue is better addressed immediately. Mitsuki nodded. It's all right, Principal sir. What's this about, anyway? You were kind of vague on the phone. Nezu clapped his hands together. Well, it seems as though some rather troubling patterns in your son's behavior have come to light and we would like to discuss how these will be addressed moving forward. What kind of patterns? Mitsuki looked at the principal suspiciously, but it was Aizawa that answered. His behavior is excessively aggressive and even violent. Oh, that's just Katsuki. Mitsuki smiled. He's an explosive boy, comes with his quirk. That is not a good excuse. Hound dog growls. Aizawa scowled. He saw what Deku meant when he said it was the adult's fault Bakugo's behavior hadn't been checked. In a battle exercise earlier today, your son knowingly used an attack that could have killed or seriously injured his opponent. It is only due to that student's training and quick reflexes that he was able to dodge. Bakugo scoffed and Aizawa glared at him. It has also come to our attention that he has a history of assaulting that same student in the past. Bakugo flinched at the word assault. Kirishima noticed and tightened his grip on his shoulder briefly. Deku lies. Bakugo practically spat the words and it was all Aizawa could do not to strangle him right then. Nezu raised an eyebrow at Bakugo. That may have been what your teachers have chosen to believe in the past, but let us assure you that we will not be guilty of their same failures. Bakugo huffs. What does this have to do with Izuku? Mitsuki asked. What about the other student in the exercise? Izuku Midoriya was the other student in the exercise. Nedzu said cheerfully. He was admitted to the hero course on recommendations. I met him before the school year and suspected that he had problems with bullying, which was only confirmed by your son's behavior. Were you aware, Bakugo, that such behavior could prevent you from becoming a hero? If someone reports it, Dobby growls bitterly. Bakugo's eyes widened in shock and Mitsuki practically started vibrating in rage. You can't keep Katsuki from being a hero. He's perfect for hero work and he's been working so strong. It's been his dream since he was a kid. Aizawa wanted to scream about how her son tried to crush Deku's dream for a decade, and what was she doing then? Masaru looked like he was trying to become one with the chair as his wife stood and leaned over Nedzu's desk, veins clearly visible on her forehead. Nedzu just held up his hands placatingly. We are not planning on expelling your son. At least, not today. If you will please return to your seat, we will discuss our next course of action. Nedzu is so smooth and calm, it's impressionant, no? Ryuma mentions. Koda agrees. Mitsuki sat back down but didn't stop glaring at Nedzu, who was still smiling. Perfect. Now, as we said before, these patterns are very concerning and will not be allowed to continue. If young Bakugo wishes to remain enrolled here at UA, he will be required to attend anger management therapy with Hound Dog, our school counselor, twice weekly during his free PRD. Bakugo's jaw dropped. What? Why the FCK should I have to talk to some stupid shrink? I'm not F-king crazy. That's not the only reason to go to therapy, Kirishima says with concern. Yeah, and with how traumatic and stressful hero work is, we'll all have to go eventually. Ashido agrees. These are the facts of life. Kaminari nods. Dude. Zero deadpants. Changes need to be made, Bakugo. Nedzu said calmly. And therapy will be the most effective way of assisting you to make those changes as well as monitoring your progress. I'm not going to F-king therapy. Bakugo slammed his smoking hands on Nedzu's desk. Then you'll be expelled and may face criminal assault charges. Aizawa said simply. Same goes for if you attend therapy but don't make any progress. We don't need heroes running around who are going to abuse their power. Not so subtle glances at Endeavor have the man crossing his arms. Bakugo scowled, hands smoking, but sat down. Mitsuki cuffed him upside the head. Come on, brat, it's your own fault apparently. I'm sure it won't be that bad, Katsuki, Masaru said softly. Bakugo just scoffed. We done here or what? You just need to sign this stating that you understand the conditions of your continued enrollment and that you agree to them, and then you'll be free to go. Nedzu said cheerfully. The family left as soon as the paperwork was done and Aizawa groaned as soon as the door closed. Is it wrong that I want him to mess up so I can expel him? Nizu hummed and sipped his tea. His behavior up until now has been cruel, but I believe Deku was right in saying that no one has tried to correct his behavior before. He might have genuinely thought he was in the right, or might simply have not known how to change. He set down his cup and sighed. I just hope we're not too late. Redemption. Ashido and Kaminari cheer. That's 2 down the redemption route. Kirishima joins. Shame it's a forced redemption. Zero sighs. Whatever. Bakugo grumbles. Just quiet down, the next one is starting. Now playing Mastermind strategist for hire to be a hero. Shudo woke up dazed and disoriented. By the time he was aware enough to look around the room, he'd been tied to a chair with cork-suppressant cuffs. A man with painful-looking scars sat in a chair across from him, but from what Shudo could see, they were the only 2 in the room. Here we go. Dobby sighs. Hey Shudo, the man said softly, it's good to see you. Shudo frowned slightly. He didn't understand why a villain, even one who just kidnapped him, was happy to see him. Who are you? The man smiled slightly. I go by Dobby, but I think you can guess that's not my real name. He leaned forward. We actually knew each other once, back before I got these scars. Is he really making me figure this out myself? Todoroki growls. Would you believe him if he just came out and said it? Izuku asked in a calm voice. Todoroki huffed but agreed anyway. Am I just supposed to know who you are? Dobby shrugged. It's not like you knew a whole lot of people back then. That flaming BS kept you isolated so no one could distract you from your training. Endeavor chose not to react to the glares thrown his way. That made Shudo pause. He'd never heard anyone else talk about Endeavor that way, with the same intense hatred he himself felt. Against his better judgment, he found himself actually liking the villain that had kidnapped him. But how did he know about Shudo's isolation? My hair was red then, too, kinda like yours. Dobby continued, producing a brilliant blue flame and watching it flicker with brilliant teal eyes. Shudo racked his brain, trying to think of who this guy could be. Red hair, like his left side. Strong flame quirk, like his left side. Teal eyes, like... Shudo's eyes widened. Tuya? The man smiled. Hey there, little brother. You're switching scenes now. Ashido cried. Hush, we might come back to it. Kaminari insisted. Aizawa rested his head in his hands as he sat in the interrogation room waiting for Tsukachi. Dozens of students were hurt by the gas or the other villains, another in critical condition from a classmate's rampaging quirk, an abducted pro-hero, a kidnapped student, and a dead child. The three measly villains they'd managed to capture were nothing in comparison to the unmitigated horror that the training camp had been. Dark Shadow. Tokoyami tried to comfort his whimpering counterpart. Meanwhile, Koda really died. Izuku sniffled as his friends surrounded him in a hug. Aizawa looked up when he heard the door open. Tsukachi looked at him sympathetically and set a cup of coffee down in front of him. How are you holding up? I couldn't save him, Aizawa said. I knew they'd taken him and I got so close, but at the last minute, I was too weak. He looked at the detective. What kind of a teacher lets his student be kidnapped? Most sensitive. You did what you could. Don't blame yourself. Tsukachi sighed. We're dealing with elite villains the likes of which we haven't seen since before All Might's debut. The blame for this incident is theirs and theirs alone. This was the same group that managed to kill the symbol of peace, so don't blame yourself that you couldn't take them all out. That being said, we do need your statement of the incident. Maybe it can help us find Todoroki in time. Truth. Listen to him. Hurry. Do you know why he was taken? Aizawa asked. Tsukachi shook his head. We were hoping you knew. The best we can come up with is that he was probably abducted to use as leverage against Endeavor. These villains are targeting Hero Society itself, so it'd be in line with their goals. Not quite. Todoroki deadpants. Aizawa nodded. The first I knew of the attack was when Mandalay sent out the message. I left Vlad King with the other students and left to go fight. As soon as I left the main building, I was confronted by a flame user who implied that they were after the students. I tried to interrogate him, but he dissolved into goo before I could get any information out of him. Goo? Tsukachi questioned. I thought you said he had a fire quirk? That's my jam. My bad. He did, Aizawa sighed. I think the goo was some kind of cloning quirk belonging to another villain. Tsukachi nodded. What happened next? I took out Muscular as he tried to chase one of my students. I then went into the forest, sending any students I came across back to camp. I had just saved Ururika and Azui when Bakugo found me and told me Todoroki had been kidnapped by a villain in a yellow coat that compressed him into a marble. I searched and found the flame villain I'd fought earlier talking to someone else. I followed them until I saw the villain that had taken Todoroki, then cancelled his quirk, which temporarily freed Todoroki. He grits his teeth, then everything went to sit. The fire user used his flames to block my field of vision. I couldn't see him to cancel his quirk and I couldn't see any of the other villains either. By the time the flames disappeared, they were gone, taking Todoroki with them. What did the villains look like? Can you give me any physical characteristics? Aizawa nodded. Let's start with the fire user. Tsukachi said, what did he look like? Tall, black hair, teal eyes. His skin was pale, but his neck and arms as well as part of his face were covered in large burn scars that appeared to be stitched together with his normal skin. Tsukachi paused in his note-taking. You said he was held together by stitches? As soon as Aizawa said yes, Tsukachi stood and opened the door. Sansa, bring me the reports on the canvassing operation. What's wrong? Aizawa asked. Nothing, Tsukachi smiled, but we might have a location on the League of Villains. You're how they found us patchwork. Shigaraki griped. We escaped, didn't we? Dobby snapped. Guys, can we not? Fight, fight, fight. Father told us you died. Dobby scoffed and rolled his eyes. Yeah, 'cause after all the shit that guy's done, he'll definitely draw the line at lying. Doesn't change the fact that we mourned him. Todoroki growls. Shudo frowned. It made sense, a little too much sense actually, But he still wasn't sure Dobby was telling the truth. "If you're really my brother," he said suspiciously, "what did we do on weekends when Endeavor would meet with the Hero Commission?" Dobby's eyes lit up. "Mom would gather us all in the front room with all the pillows and blankets in the house. Then she and Fuyumi would make hot chocolate for all of us and we'd watch a movie. Then we'd make a game of cleaning up so there was no trace of what had happened by the time Father came home." He frowned. "We stopped that tradition when Endeavor locked Mom away. That's such a sweet tradition. Midnight coups. It's a shame it had to be hidden." Mike sighs and stopped. Aizawa agreed. Shudo stared. None of them had ever told anyone about that tradition so that Endeavor would never find out. There was no way he could have known about it, much less spoken about it with so much happiness unless he really was Tuya. "I also remember that Mom would ice your bruises and burns after Endeavor's training," he spits out bitterly. "After she was gone, Fuyumi took over that job." Dobby met Shudo's eyes. "They did the same thing for me when I was subjected to the BSTRD's training before you got your quirk." Todoroki straightens. "Wah. You went through it too?" Shudo breathed out. Dobby nodded. "It was hell. He'd make me work past my body's limits, producing fire for hours even though it hurt. He'd kick me when I was down, then blame me for being weak when I couldn't stand up again. He'd constantly remind me that I wasn't good enough, even though I was the best shot he had at beating All Might at the time." He scowled. "And when you finally got your quirk, he tossed me aside as just another failure, forgetting all the abuse he'd put me through in favor of abusing you." "I get it," Todoroki said sadly. "I don't like it, but I get it." "I'm sorry." Shudo said, "I'm sorry he forgot about you." Dobby shrugged. "It wasn't your fault. I'm sorry you got the perfect quirk and had to go through that hell disguised as training. Longer than I ever did." He chuckled. "Even back when I was living at home, I'd dream about what I'd do to the BSE if I ever got the chance. How I'd kill him when I got strong enough, even as he was pounding me into the floor. I hated him even then." He looked at Shudo. "You hate him too, don't you?" "I don't know." Todoroki whispers. "And that's okay, you don't have to know," Izuku says, firmly offering comfort to his friend. Shudo swallowed, but nodded. Absently, he knew that as Endeavor's masterpiece, he shouldn't be bonding with a villain, but Dobby was his brother who understood. His brother, who had the same burning hatred as he did for their father. Even Natsuo and Fuyumi couldn't understand, not in the same way. "That's why you don't use your fire, isn't it?" Dobby asked. "Because you hate him." Shudo nodded. "It's his quirk. I don't need his power, just like I don't need him. It's not his, it's mine." Todoroki reminds himself. Dobby shook his head. "There's a better option here." Shudo tilted his head in a silent question and Dobby continued. "Endeavor gave you that fire so you'd become a hero. So what if you were to use that fire for something that dear old dad would hate?" Shudo started, remembering Midoriya's words back at the sports festival. "You could always use it to do things your father would hate. How would you like to use your fire to show Dad how wrong he was? How would you like to use it to show him how much you hate him?" "Yeah, little brother, how about it?" Dobby starts to smile. Shudo thought for a minute. He was supposed to be a hero, that was what he'd been raised to do, but the idea of showing his father how much he'd hurt him was tempting. Father was the one that was always pushing Shudo to become a hero, but had he ever really wanted that? "I did and I do again now," Todoroki answered. Maybe he had once, back when he was a little kid, back before his mother had been forced away from him, but that small longing had been burned and kicked out of Shudo by a decade of abuse. The only reason he was even at UA was because of what his father wanted. But what did Shudo want? He clenched his fists as the hate burning in his heart grew even hotter. He wanted to show the world what kind of a person Endeavor really was and hurt him like he'd hurt Shudo. He wanted to hurt everyone who thought that heroes were perfect and would always save the day. He wanted to prove to them that heroes weren't gods. He wanted to hurt all the heroes who must have known what was going on, but who never once came to save him. He looked at his brother with fire in his eyes. "So Shudo," Dobby asked, "how would you like to be a villain?" "I have a feeling he's going to say yes." Shinsao sighed. "So do I." Todoroki agreed. "How you feeling, Todoroki?" Izuku asks. Todoroki takes a moment to answer. "Conflicted? I'm still sad and angry that my brother left. I'm upset he left me behind. I want my brother back, but he's done so much against us. I don't think I'll ever forgive him." "Nor do you need to," Ida informed. You can attempt a future relationship with your brother with the understanding that there are things he will never be forgiven for. Totally, like with Deku and Bakugo, I know they said the ones on screen were worse, but there's probably something even the ever-patient and tolerant Deku won't forgive. She's right, I'm not telling you what, but she's right. Forgiveness is the choice of the wronged and no one else. Karo, thank you. Todoroki sighs with relief. Now playing Viridian the Green Guide responsibilities. Deku wasn't coming back. That was what their sidious villain of a teacher had announced at the beginning of homeroom. He said that Deku had decided to transfer schools, and Katsuki could only hope that was really what happened instead of it being a cover story, for if Izuku had really... Katsuki shook his head and forced himself to keep walking toward the community center. If Deku had killed himself, his old hag would have told him. She and Auntie Inko had always been close, so if Deku was dead, he'd be one of the first to know. He had to be alive. Katsuki didn't know what he'd do if that DMN nerd had really followed his messed up advice. Would I? Bakugo asks, strangely subdued. Would I have been told? The crowd holds their breath as Headcase dims a pained look on her face. She pauses, wishing she had something better to say. Izuku interrupts. It depends on the world. The resignation in his voice is oh so telling. A spark of anger enters the light being's face, her glow almost pitch black. Yes, and it's rarely handled as it should. She takes a breath to calm herself, but in the vast majority of worlds, such an event motivates you to be better. A moment passes with the audience calming themselves before returning to the screen. The rehabilitation group met in one of the larger rooms of the community center. Amplifier was already setting up chairs in a big circle when he arrived. She looked up when she heard the door open and smiled as brightly as Deku did. Katsuki scowled. The last thing he needed today was more reminders of the DM and nerd. Hey Bakugo! She yelled cheerfully. Right on time. Can you finish setting up these chairs while I grab some water? Katsuki didn't bother responding, figuring that the way he moved to grab a few of the chairs stacked against the wall was answer enough. Amplifier seemed to agree, given that she immediately left the room and let him do his thing. He didn't know exactly how many chairs to set up, but the group couldn't be that big, so after there were about 20 chairs out, he leaned against the wall and crossed his arms to wait. That's a pretty good estimation. Amplifier agrees. Amplifier came back a few minutes later carrying a large water jug that she set on the table next to him. Alright, that's about it. Pretty low maintenance setup, don't you think? Katsuki didn't really know what to say to that, so he just nodded. The villain extras were starting to filter in, so Amplifier left to go chat with them while Katsuki pretended to stare at the floor, even though he was really just observing the people he'd supposedly volunteered to help or something like that. He had a feeling Amplifier knew what he was doing, but he didn't really care what that beach thought. You did this to yourself. Dobby snarked. We all know what it's like to force ourselves to do something we need to, even if we don't want to. Shigaraki says calmly. When did you get reasonable? Dobby sighs. When I realized all our tragic backstories will probably be on display, so taking digs at yours when you're obviously upset by it might be a bad idea. Shigaraki says plainly. Thanks. Dobby mumbles quietly. The people coming into the room didn't match what Katsuki had always been taught about villains, so that was just one more way his teachers had failed at their jobs, he guessed. Aside from the little tracking bracelets around their ankles, the villains looked relatively normal, nothing like the incarnations of evil that the news made them out to be. But maybe it was just because these were nobodies, not ranked villains. Or maybe they were just good at hiding who they really were, who knew? Or maybe we're just human. Twice whined. Yeah. One of them, some guy with weird little tentacles instead of hair, caught his eye and smiled at him, but Katsuki simply scowled and turned away. He wasn't here to make friends with this scum, he was here to learn how not to be so scummy himself. Besides, villains weren't good people. They couldn't be nice. Isn't that one of the trigger villains Viridian faced? Todoroki asks. I think so. Izuku agrees. Right? It only took a few minutes before everyone was there and most of the seats were filled. Amplifier smiled and skipped to the front of the room. Hello everyone, welcome back. Who's the kid? Some big guy with horns and green skin said gruffly. Amplifier grinned. Oh, this is Bakugo. He's gonna be helping me out for the next little while. There was a round of nods and welcomes from the villains, which Katsuki mostly ignored. On brand. Kaminari comments. Why'd you decide to volunteer to help a bunch of villains? A weird girl with pigtails asked loudly. Katsuki made a face that would normally send Deku running as he stared her down. None of your F-King business. There was a long moment of silence before the group erupted into laughter. The weird girl grinned. Oh, I like him. Ashido tries not to laugh, they just don't give a sit. Yeah, the big-horned villain slapped his knee. He's gonna fit in just fine. Katsuki stared at them like they'd gone crazy, then glanced at Amplifier, who was smiling at him like he'd done something great, which was what pushed him over the edge. Shut up. I don't need your city approval. Too bad. Amplifier laughs. Where'd you find this kid? One of the other villains asked. He's great. Amplifier's grin got bigger. He came to me. Don't worry, you're gonna have plenty of time to get to know him, but let's get started. Anybody want to share how their week went? The cheerful mood dropped like a rock and the assorted villains became very busy looking at the floor. Katsuki frowned. If it was just one or two that had a bad week, he'd get it, but all of them? Had there been something specific that happened, or? It's just like that sometimes. Toga chirped with a noticeable strain to her smile, not that anyone pointed that out. The big-horned villain finally spoke up. My girlfriend's family came to visit for the first time since we started dating. They're from a little town and I guess Hina didn't tell them about my quirk because well, they're the type of people that don't like mutant types. It's one thing getting called Frankenstein by little kids. They don't mean anything by it, they just think it's cool I've got green skin, but when adults say it, it's malicious. I managed to keep things civil until they left, but their stupid passive-aggressive comments really made me want to shoot someone. Shoji whispered. Tokoyami nodded and Koda patted him on the back with a sigh. Amplifier nodded in understanding. That must have been strong, facing discrimination from people who you were probably hoping would like you. I'm proud of you for holding out, though, and I hope things get better. Fat chance. Someone muttered. Katsuki frowned. Was discrimination really that big of an issue? I'll go next. The tentacle-haired villain offered. My mom was trying to get on my case about finding a job, even though I've told her there's no point. No one will hire me until I complete this rehabilitation course and get my arrest record wiped. But she doesn't seem to understand that. Normally, I just go out with friends and ignore her, but my old friends are part of why I'm in this mess in the first place, so… What are you writing? Siro asks Ashido. We should sponsor a villain rehabilitation program like Amplifier. I'm hoping Nedzu will help us, but if not, we'll have to do it ourselves. She smiles as she writes out her idea. That sucks, man, Weird Pigtails said. I'm kinda in the same boat. If I really want to become an upstanding citizen, her tone was met with a round of laughs, I have to find entirely new friends. It doesn't seem worth it sometimes. Katsuki's frown deepened as the villains kept sharing their stories. If they weren't facing obstacles because of their villain status, it was because of their quirks or their gender. It was just so foreign to him. Was this what other people experienced? Katsuki hadn't ever had anyone judge him like that. Sometimes they thought it was weird that he was so angry, but as soon as they learned what his quirk was, they just wrote it off. It just seemed wrong that their experiences were so different. It is. Aizawa grumbles. After everyone who wanted to have had a chance to share, Amplifier began talking about what the villain extras were supposed to be learning about this week. Today we're going to be learning to accept responsibility for our actions. There will always be circumstances beyond our control, but it's helpful to realize that not everything is someone else's fault. Yeah, Tentacles grinned, everything happens for a reason, and sometimes that reason is that you're an idiot. Snort ha. Obviously. That drew a laugh from everyone and even Katsuki found himself chuckling. Pretty much. Amplifier said cheerfully. But, really, recognizing that sometimes things are your own fault goes hand in hand with realizing that you can become better. This isn't about beating yourself up, it's about realizing that if you broke it, you can fix it. Katsuki thought about that. His teachers definitely hadn't done him any favors in teaching him the right way to act, but they hadn't told him to beat Deku up. They hadn't done anything to stop it, but ultimately, it was his own decision to bully Deku and the other weak-ass extras. Katsuki swallowed the… Was it guilt? Was that what he was feeling? But Amplifier said he wasn't supposed to beat himself up, however tempting that seemed right then. So what now? Patience. Amplifier comments. He's not very good at that. Aizawa mentions. She insists. He couldn't fix it. At least, he didn't feel like he could. He couldn't go back in time and be less of a jerk. He couldn't erase the fact that he'd told Deku to jump off a roof. None of that was ever going to go away, no matter how much he changed. Was there even a point to this, or was he just going to be a bully and a villain forever? Nope. HeadcaseKiller cheers. Eventually, the class ended and everyone got up to get water and socialize before heading home. Katsuki was so lost in his own guilt that he almost didn't realize that the tentacle-haired guy had come to lean against the wall right next to him. I'm Edo Ogawa, nice to meet you. Katsuki simply scoffed and tried to ignore him, but the guy wouldn't take a hint. Remind you of anyone? Bakugo smirked. Come on dude, you know you love us. Kaminari grins, earning a scoff to echo the one on screen. It's pretty cool how you're volunteering and stuff. Ogawa said. And I'm glad I'm not the new guy here anymore. Katsuki couldn't help wondering how a nice guy like this became a villain when an a-hole like him was on track to become a hero. Maybe he was just really petty and manipulative or something like that? If you've got something to ask, just ask it. Ogawa grinned. Don't be shy. I'm not f-king shy. Katsuki growled. I was just wondering what the FCK did you get arrested? You don't seem like the type. Some never do. Midnight sighed. Ogawa chuckled, thanks for the compliment. I think? He looked out at the room and sighed. My sister started running with the wrong crowd a few years ago, and I always thought her friends were so cool, so I started hanging out with people like them. I got arrested a few weeks ago for going on a rampage with a few others after we got dosed with an experimental version of Trigger. It wasn't our fault, so normally it wouldn't have put me on probation or anything, but he grimaced. I happened to have an outstanding warrant for shoplifting when they took me in. So he is the villain Viridian-faced. Todoroki confirmed. Katsuki scoffed. Everything happens for a reason, huh? Ogawa smiled sheepishly. Yeah, and I'm an idiot. I'm just lucky this program exists, 'cause otherwise I'd be screwed. They'll really wipe your arrest record if you come to this? Katsuki asked. He nodded. I think it's supposed to be a way to limit the number of villains. If they try to rehabilitate those of us who aren't too far gone, then it frees up the heroes to go after the real bad guys, right? Makes sense. Ajura comments. Katsuki shrugged. It made a certain type of sense. Well, Bakugo, it was nice meeting you, whatever your reasons are for being here. Ogawa smiled and waved as he pushed himself away from the wall. See you next week. Katsuki grunted and watched him leave. He had a lot to think about. He's going to do great. Amplifier cheers. It's nice to see progress from one of him at least. Mr. Brave comments. Deku's version might go down that route. Rocklock mentions. I'm not sure how to feel about that. Joke frowns. It's going to take time anyway. Kamui Woods remarks. We'll have to wait and see. Lady sighs. Now playing cheat code support strategist Anomalies, Izuku sharpened his pencils and separated the notebooks he'd dedicated to Class 1A. He didn't really think he'd learn anything new about their quirks today since they were just doing a special rescue lesson, but it would be interesting to see how they applied their quirks in a non-combat-oriented situation. He was particularly excited to see how Katsuki reacted to being confronted with a problem that he couldn't punch. Wow, you jumped on the petty train real quick. Shinso chuckled. I'm very adaptable. Izuku nods with false innocence. Izuku glanced at the clock. The class would be arriving in just a few minutes, assuming that no one had any issues getting into their costumes or anything, so he went ahead and opened up the camera feeds to get a visual of 13 already waiting inside. Their quirk was so amazing. Izuku made a mental note that he needed to get their autograph sometime, maybe after the sports festival? Anytime. 13 giggles. Since the students hadn't arrived yet, Izuku figured he might as well use the time to familiarize himself with the facility. It was so cool. All sorts of different terrains simulated different disasters that the students would have to deal with as pro-heroes, and from his place inside the system, Izuku could easily see all the different controls for each of the zones. At any point, 13, Nedzu, or whoever was teaching could easily turn off any of the disaster zones if anything went wrong, or even turn them up or control them almost like a video game to offer their students more of a challenge. They'd all been set to the lowest automatic disaster setting for the first years, obviously, But Izuku knew he'd be asking Nezu if he could observe one of the third year's rescue exercises so he could see the building's full potential. It was so cool. Yeah. Hadu cheered. It is quite the challenge. Mirio comments proudly. So much pressure. Amajiki mumbles. Movement on one of his screens caught his eye as the bus finally arrived and the students started to file off following a grumpy Eraserhead like a line of little ducklings. Izuku snickered to himself. Maybe there was a way he could make sure Katsuki heard that? It would be sure to PSS him off. Izuku glanced at Katsuki trying not to laugh. He's not as angry as expected. The last student left the bus. Izuku checked the schedule. Wasn't All Might supposed to be there today? As 13 lectured the students on quirk safety, Izuku hummed thoughtfully and pulled out his phone to check the news. Mei had called him to ramble about a new idea, right as he was about to get on the train, so he hadn't had a chance to read the headlines that morning like he unusually did. All Might winced. Sure enough, All Might was all over the news, which meant that he must already be either near or over his limit for the day. Izuku couldn't really fault him, since those people obviously needed to be saved, and being their hero was All Might's job, but he had been really looking forward to seeing his favorite hero perform rescue exercises just like his debut. Even if he wouldn't actually be in the same room, it still would have been really cool to watch something like that live. It would have been great. Instead we had to experience it. With the mystery of All Might's absence solved, Izuku turned his attention back to the screens in front of him, where 13 was finishing up their lecture as a blackish purple. Something started to appear behind them. Izuku frowned and zoomed in to get a closer look. He hadn't seen any obstacles like that in the system, but it was possible he'd missed something. Unfortunately not. Ida gritted his teeth. Suddenly, every single camera cut out at the exact same time. Izuku immediately attacked his keyboard, desperately trying to convince himself that there was no reason to panic. It must just be a weird electrical glitch or something. There was no way that that purple thing was a villain trying to attack the students, right? But even if it was an electrical glitch, there was a failsafe on another electrical system that would trigger the alarms if a certain number of cameras stopped working, and that alarm wasn't going off. No alarms were. Tell Meijima Sensei. Mei strains. After a minute of trying to get the cameras back up, Izuku hesitantly stood up and left his desk. It was probably nothing. UA's security was the best of the best. But it still wouldn't hurt to have Power Loader call 13 and make sure everything was alright, right? It was completely unnecessary and would probably annoy them because there was definitely not a villain attack happening right now, but just in case there was. That's right, come to me. Meijima says with a stressed voice. Izuku slowly approached Power Loader's desk, only to find him talking to Hanzo. He didn't want to interrupt him while he was helping another student, but there might be an attack happening right now. Power Loader? Midoriya? Power Loader nodded to him. I'll be with you in just a minute. Listen to him. Aizawa grits his teeth. Izuku took a deep breath. The longer he thought about it, the more the whole situation just seemed wrong. He familiarized himself with the USJ, and there was nothing that was like that purple thing. Now was definitely not the time to let his social anxiety get the better of him. Actually, sir, Izuku tried to inject as much urgency as he could, hoping Power Loader would get the message without making the class panic. I need you to check something out. Power Loader looked at him strangely. Hanzo, just keep working. I'm going to see what Midoriya needs and I'll be back in a minute. Good, he got a teacher. Yamamo sighs. When Hanzo shrugged good-naturedly, Izuku walked back to his workroom as quickly as he could without running, grateful beyond belief that Power Loader was so different from his middle school teachers and trusted him without asking too many questions. It was nice and he would probably be crying if he wasn't so worried. A part of him half expected the cameras to be working again when he got back to his computer, making his entire anxiety attack an embarrassing overreaction, but of course, all of his screens were still blank. Izuku waited for Power Loader to follow him in before closing the door. Alright Midoriya, what is this about? Power Loader asked. It's not like you. To interrupt like that? Mei yes, obviously. But not. I lost contact with the USJ. Izuku blurted out. That was blunt. Dobby scoffs. Power Loader froze. I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I was watching 1A over the cameras and everything was fine, But then there was this purple thing and the cameras just stopped working. I couldn't find anything like that in the system and there should be alarms going off, but there's not an. Izuku forced himself to stop rambling and took a deep breath. I think it might be a villain attack. There is. Oh God, hurry. Please. Power Loader took a sharp intake of breath. It's All Might, 13 and Eraserhead there today, right? Izuku shook his head. 13 and Eraserhead are there, but All Might's already at his limit. Is there any way you could call them? Just to make sure everything's alright? Power Loader was already pulling out his phone. Why am I not surprised that you know about that? I'm sure everything's fine. This'll just take a minute. Everything is not fine. We're fighting for our lives. Please hurry. Izuku held his breath as the phone rang. After a long minute, Power Loader took the phone from his ear and dialed another number. Eraser sometimes doesn't answer the phone, you know how he is? He thinks it's a waste of time, but 13 should have their phone on them. Not one word. Aizawa warns his friends. Power Loader's face grew more and more worried as the phone continued ringing with no answer until he finally put it away. I need to report this to Nedzu. Izuku gulped and sat down at his desk, pulling his keyboard toward him. So it was an attack then? I'll try to reconnect with the cameras and keep you updated. Hacking around a quirk? Shigaraki snickers good luck. Power Loader nodded stiffly and left, only to return a second later with a small box that he set down on the desk in front of him. Have you ever used a comm link before? Izuku shook his head and Power Loader took one out and handed it to him. Okay, channel control is right on the side there. Just tune it to channel 3 and you'll be able to talk to any of the teachers once they turn their comms on. It's an open line, so we should be able to hear everything. Do you understand? Izuku set up the comm like Power Loader had told him and put it in his ear, then nodded. Power Loader returned the gesture before throwing open the door to the lab. Hanzo, as class rep, I'm leaving you in charge. Make sure nobody blows anything up. He's busy. Mei defends her teacher. There were some groans and exclamations, but Power Loader didn't pay attention to any of them as he closed the door to the workroom and left the lab as quickly as he could. Izuku distantly noted that he didn't run either. So they didn't want to cause a panic at the main school then. His fingers flew over the keyboard as he started troubleshooting the cameras. He had only been at it a few minutes when the PA system crackled to life, but Izuku barely noticed the announcement. He needs to focus, it's only logical. Aizawa comments. Joke replies distractedly. All teachers please report to the front office immediately. Again, all teachers to the front office. There was a small string of code that seemed to be repeating and it looked almost like it could be a technology quirk of some kind that was blocking the signals. Izuku felt torn. On the one hand, having a quirk involved meant that it was almost definitely villains, but on the other, Izuku knew quirks. All he had to do was find the quirk's weakness and exploit it. He'll do well. Nedzu says certain. Midoriya? Power Loader's voice echoed in his earpiece. Are you still there? Sir. Izuku didn't stop working, even as the other teachers started talking. Wait, the little listeners on the comm link? That was Present Mic's voice. He knew it well enough from listening to his radio show for years. Fanboy. Mike smiled briefly. Young Midoriya's here? All Might asked. It seemed like Nedzu was ignoring all of them, since he addressed Izuku next. Have you had any luck in re-establishing contact with the USJ facility? Not yet, sir. Izuku said distractedly. But it is a technology quirk and... Do you have a visual? Power Loader asked. What? Izuku's brain took a moment to catch up. Oh no, not yet, but I figured out how the blocking quirk works. It seems to only be blocking a specific type of signal. I mean, that's obviously what our cameras are using, but I might be able to jury-rig things from my side and use another type of signal to connect. You were saying? Dobby snarked as Shigaraki growled. All right, Nedzu said. Do that and tell us immediately when you get through. Izuku felt a small surge of pride. Nedzu had said when, not if. He believed in him. So do we. You got this. Do it, do it, do it. He shook his head. No time to think about that right now. Right now he needed to make sure that the teachers weren't going into this fight blind. It took him a few minutes to hack his way through, but he'd already tried hacking UA twice, so he knew how all the systems worked, and with the extra permissions that Nedzu had given him, Izuku had just barely enough experience and authority to do what he had in mind. He hit one final key, the cameras flared to life again, and Izuku didn't like what he saw. Damn it. Shigaraki growled. Those were definitely villains. Nedzu, I have a visual. What's the situation? Students have been scattered throughout the facility. Izuku reported. Eraserhead is fighting, but he's outnumbered. There are dozens of them. Mostly low level though, it looks like. 13 is by the entrance protecting some of the students. They seem to be in a stalemate with one of the villains, probably the one responsible for the purple thing I saw before the cameras cut out, considering they seem to be made of some kind of purple mist. He took to this position quickly. Koda remarks. He, unfortunately, didn't have a choice. Shoji sighs. Izuku didn't know how he was so composed considering that there was a villain attack happening and oh god, people might die, but he supposed he was just too busy to panic. Or maybe he was channeling his panic into focus. That made sense. Suddenly, the stalemate between 13 and the villain broke. 13 is down. Izuku yelled. I repeat, 13 is down. That's how that happened. It's so much worse seeing it myself. They survive, remember. That doesn't make it less scary. I didn't say it did. He heard several of the teachers swear over the line, but he was too busy staring at the screen to respond. 13. Were they even going to survive that attack? Is this what villains really did? Izuku felt so powerless. He wasn't even there. He couldn't even do anything to help them. There's a physical limit to how fast we can go. Hound Dog growled. All Might sounded worried. Maybe I should. Izuku started scanning the cameras again. You're already at your limit. If you use what little you have left to get there, you're not going to have enough energy left to fight the villains. The students are holding their own for now. The one that hurt 13 has a warp quirk and turned their quirk against them. It was a lucky shot, and it won't work against most of the students. You're buying them time. Uraraka comments. Will it be enough though? Izuku asks. Hey, this is your third USJ and all the students survived. Even with Mastermind there, they'll do it again. Mei insists. Izuku takes a breath. Yeah. Midoriya is correct. Nedza said. If there's a warp quirk, there might be other powerful quirks as well. The students need you to be as close to full strength as possible. Eraserhead is still there and the villains don't know that we know of the attack, so it's better to go as fast as humanly possible for now. Midoriya, let us know if anything changes. Tightening grips, deep controlled breaths, everyone is painfully aware that anything can happen. Will do. Izuku felt so useless. There had to be something he could do. It might help the heroes if he could figure out why the heroes were there. And for that he needed audio. Izuku used the same hack he'd used on the cameras and started eavesdropping on the various villains' conversations, switching the microphones rapidly as he tried to overhear anything useful. Excellent idea. Nedzu compliments. Didn't tell me the plan, kid, I swear. One of the villains was caught in Todoroki's ice quirk. All they told me was that they're gonna kill All Might. That's all I know. Izuku switched mics again as Todoroki started unthawing the villain. Not the most hero-like, but then again, neither was hacking so he couldn't talk. They're here to kill All Might. I don't know why or how yet. It was harsh, wasn't it? Todoroki winces. Once again, you're getting better, Karo. Tsu reminds. There was a villain near where Eraserhead was fighting, but he almost seemed to be supervising instead of fighting himself. Izuku switched to one of the mics near him as the villain started scratching at his neck. A stress response? Yeah. Shigaraki grumbles. When's the final boss gonna get here? The villain's voice was raspy as he muttered to himself. We're running out of NPCs. So immature? It was strong to tell how old the villain was, but considering that he called his own men NPCs, he was almost definitely the leader. Probably antisocial, considering the video game references. Final boss must be All Might. Did he know that the heroes were on their way? No, then he would have said something about final bosses or even mini-bosses, but he didn't, so he was probably thinking that All Might was just late. Just because it's true doesn't mean you should say it. Shigaraki griped. He didn't, Toga said cheekily he thought it. Shut up. He snaps, making her giggle. Still, the video game references gave him an idea. Now that he'd done it twice, it didn't take Izuku all that long to hack into each of the different zones. Within minutes, he had the weapons of artificial flooding, earthquake simulators, flamethrowers, and so much more at his fingertips. With Eraserhead slowing down, he had to do everything in his power to make sure that the students were safe. All right, villain, you want to treat this like a game? Izuku stretched his hands out in front of him, popping his knuckles. Then let's play. FCK yeah. Get him. Kick their asses. I have goosebumps. Good luck. Headcase chuckles to herself as she prepares the next chapter.